I've loved crime fiction for a long time, and it infuriates me that some people think of it as a mere genre, distinct from serious literature. I have less and less patience with thinking that builds a hierarchy in art. These so called genres contain some of the finest literature of our times. I've spoken before about how I've come to love science fiction for the ways in which it deals with some of the big questions that concern us. And crime fiction, in a sense, can also rip open the heart of our society. We are all frail and flawed creatures in a complex world. We often flounder. We are surrounded by puzzles that seem impossible to solve, and nothing is as it seems. This is the human condition. It's what literature deals with. And the best crime fiction is not just about mysteries of the exterior world, but the interior world as well. Plus, like all great art, when it's done well, it can be damn entertaining. Edge of the seat excitement. What's not to like?
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Varma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest today is Rudraneil Sengupta, who wrote to me recently saying he had written a new book and would love to come on the show. Now, I'd never interacted with Rudraneil before this, but I was a fan of his previous book, Enter the Dangal, which is a magisterial history of Indian wrestling. In 2016, I'd met the wrestler Sakshi Malik. I'd written a feature story on her, which I really enjoyed. I'll link that from the show notes. And around that time, I came across Enter the Dangal, and I was blown away by what a good book it was. Well, Rudraneil's new book is out, and it's a novel. In fact, it's crime fiction. The beast within draws from Rudraneil's years as an embedded reporter with the Delhi police, and it is rooted in this real world that he has seen up close. I loved everything about this book, the research, the craft, the storytelling, and Rudraneil drew not just from his experiences in Delhi, but also from the finest crime fiction writers in the world. In this conversation, we go deep into subjects of the craft. If you love writing, you'll enjoy that bit, as well as how the police functions in Delhi and how cases are actually solved. And of course, we talk about Rudraneil himself, and you'll realize that the excellence of the work comes from a combination of curiosity and caring. He's thrown himself deeply over whatever has taken his fancy through his life, from the blues to baul music to Bengali literature to Indian wrestling to playing the guitar and now into the world of crime. If you live fully, you can't go wrong. So without much ado, let's get to the conversation, but first a quick commercial break. Do you want to read more? I've put in a lot of work in recent years in building a reading habit. This means that I read more books, but I also read more long-form articles and essays. There's a world of knowledge available through the internet, but the problem we all face is, how do we navigate this knowledge? How do we know what to read? How do we put the right incentives in place? Well, I discovered one way. A couple of friends of mine run this awesome company called CTQ Compounds at ctqcompounds.com, which aims to help people up-level themselves by reading more. A few months ago, I signed up for one of their programs called The Daily Reader. Every day for 6 months, they sent me a long-form article to read. The subjects covered went from machine learning to mythology to mental models and marmalade. This helped me build a habit of reading. At the end of every day, I understood the world a little better than I did before. So if you want to build your reading habit, head on over to CTQ Compounds and check out their Daily Reader. New batches start every month. They also have a great program called Future Stack, which helps you stay up to date with ideas, skills, and mental models that will help you stay relevant in the future. Future Stack batches start every Saturday. What's more, you get a discount of a whopping 2,500 rupees. 2,500 if you use the discount code UNSEEN. So head on over to CTQ Compounds at ctqcompounds.com and use the code UNSEEN. Up-level yourself. Rudraneil, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
Thank you so much.
Let's start by talking about your childhood. You know, you've described yourself as a Calcutta boy and a Delhi man. And so I want to double click on your time in Calcutta, assuming that's where you were born and stuff.
Yeah.
And take me through your early childhood. And maybe at a later point, I'll also ask you to define Calcutta boy. What is it? You know, what is that package of things that makes you describe yourself that way, apart from the circumstance of being a boy in Calcutta, I guess? But just tell me about your family, your childhood, your growing up years.
Wow, that's a big one to start with.
I've never heard this show.
But can I just say that it feels so nice to be in a podcast that where there's no video involved, which seems to me to be a very weird thing. Like it defeats the purpose of it. So I feel very nice to be in a room with just mics, just audio, wearing whatever I feel like wearing. It feels
Is that
almost.
why you took your shirt off?
It feels
I mean,
almost
you're looking
civilized.
great, but
Yeah, okay. I was born in Bombay. But I only spent a few months in Bombay, and then my family shifted to Kolkata. My dad is an engineer, and he worked for various companies in designing lights. And my mom worked for Punjab National Bank. So we shifted to Calcutta when I was a few months old, and then from then on, I grew up in Kolkata all the way till I finished college, my masters, before I shifted to Delhi. And Kolkata is an amazing place to grow up in, as every single person I have ever known from there, they all say the same thing. Amazing place to grow up in. But of course, it's not so amazing once you're grown up and you need to work and make money and things like that. When the city suddenly becomes a little bit of a trap. But growing up, it's a slow city. It used to be. Let's also clarify this. I don't recognize any cities anymore. Okay, like anywhere I've been to, maybe 5 years back, and I go now, I'm like, I have no idea what's happening, and that applies to even Gurgaon or Noida. Or I was just recently in Bangalore, and parts of Bangalore in the outskirts. I was looking at the way the construction was going, and I'm like, okay, next year if I come back to Bangalore, I will not recognize this place. So Kolkata has changed, I think, quite a lot. When I was growing up, it was slow. It was a very nostalgic city in a way. It was like lots of old buildings, atmospheric because of that, and great food. I particularly remember Sundays, we used to go for guitar classes to this guitarist's house. His name is Amit Datta. He's a huge star in Kolkata. Anyway, we used to go to Amit Datta's house, and he used to live in the older part of the city, near central Kolkata, in this really huge old Kolkata house, and magnificent house, big arches, and every room was like a hall. And we used to go there, play the guitar, and on our way back home, we could smell meat curry, mangsher jhol being cooked in every house. You could hear the pressure cooker whistles going off, and the smell wafting through the streets. And so that's kind of like, in a way, like if you look at Miyazaki movies and how children experience Japan in Miyazaki movies, a lot of it's all very soft, and there's beautiful light and beautiful smells and beautiful sounds. That's what Kolkata feels to me like, when I was growing up there as a city. Yeah, so that's what it was like. I mean, I'm not trying to say that my childhood was like perfect and ideal, because what I'm describing is, of course, external stuff. And then, as a child, everybody has difficulties, problems, bullying in school, violence, this, that. Or you have to navigate so much. Really, children have to go through real shit in their life. So everybody goes through it, and I've also been through that. So, but that is the internal stuff. But externally, Kolkata is an amazing place.
So, this reminds me, oddly enough at first, but you'll see why it reminds me of that. It reminds me of Rahim Azum Raza's novel Adha Gao, which Amitav Kumar wrote about and quoted in an episode with me. And I'll read that passage out by him, where Amitav writes, "In Raza's Adha Gao, the protest against the nation is being made in the name of the village. When the fiercely well-educated Muslim students came to Gangauli to preach about partition and the necessity for the creation of a new nation of Pakistan, the Muslim villagers are genuinely bewildered. One of the villagers is a young man called Tannu, who has returned from battle fighting for the British in the Second World War. He argues against the urban visitors in the name of his village." And now these are Tannu's words. "I am a Muslim, but I love this village because I myself am this village. I love the indigo warehouse, this tank, and these mud lanes because they are different forms of myself. On the battlefield, when death came near, I certainly remembered Allah, but instead of Mecca or Karbala, I remembered Gangauli." So a question I've asked many of my guests, and I'll ask you, is what is your Gangauli?
Oh, for certain, Kolkata qualifies. I mean, if whether I'm very distressed or whether I'm very content, on both sides of that spectrum, if I sit down and think about Kolkata, and the image that comes to mind, the memories that come to mind are always very comforting. Again, like I said, I can't really live there anymore as a grown up, but yes, the childhood was very special. Place is very special, absolutely. So little lanes, playing cricket in the streets, playing football in the rain, monsoon mud. Oh my god, that's amazing. And then having jilipi and shingara or jalebi and samosas right after the game, completely wet, filled with mud, and that kind of stuff. It's amazing. So yeah, absolutely, that's my Ganguly.
When I asked this question to Max Rodenbeck, who used to be editor of The Economist in Delhi, Max had grown up in Cairo. So he said, my Bengali is Cairo, but it's not the Cairo of today. It's a Cairo of when I grew up. And is that also the case with you? That does that Calcutta that you remember, the Kolkata that you remember, does it exist? Or can it only be accessed through the warm light of nostalgia?
No, it exists for sure. Like, for example, the lane where I grew up, where my parents still stay, has barely changed. It's like the same shops, the same people of those who are still alive. That was there when I was growing up, 30 years back, 40 years back. If I go to the market where I used to go because both my parents were working, I used to go to the market to do the veggie, meat, fish shopping, quite young. And so that market looks exactly the same as always. Heaps of herbs, heaps of colorful vegetables, fish section, meat section, just as dirty and as quaint as always. The fish seller has like 6 or 7 dogs and 8 or 9 cats that live in the shop with him. And I remember, like, as a child, being fascinated by his menagerie of animals. In fact, once an injured kite even took shelter there, and immediately became the boss of all the animals. Like, every single animal was scared of the one big kite. Still exactly the same. So all the shops exist, the lane looks the same, and this applies to many of my friends' houses and places that I've known as a kid. But like I was talking about Amit Datta, my guitar teacher, who used to live in this old house, for example, that doesn't exist anymore. That old house is gone. There's an apartment complex that's come up. He himself now lives in an apartment complex in a completely different part of town. And there are, of course, many new parts of town which I know nothing about, of which I've seen only photos and drone footage, as you now see all the time on YouTube. And I am like, wow, this is also Kolkata. I have no idea about those places. But so it exists. Newmarket exists exactly like it used to be. Again, a place of great which held great fascination for me as a child. I used to love Newmarket. Of course, it's architecturally fantastic, and bewildering variety of shops inside. That old beautiful colonial British market architecture. I used to love going to Newmarket, especially for Christmas, when it becomes this completely crazy place full of trinkets and all the lights and all the colors you can imagine, and Christmas trees and little gifts and toys, and the Nahum's bakeries, all the smells coming from there, the plum cakes, and so that's also exists just like it was for a bit there. Nahum's, which is a legendary bakery, almost closed down, but for some reason it's continuing to function. And while it was closing down, there was, I think, a lot of emotional response to the fact that this great institution was going to go, and somehow suddenly their sales, I think, surged because of that, and now they've managed to again get back on even keel, and they're still functioning. So yeah, lots of parts of Kolkata. I think maybe one thing that I would miss very much is this is something you would miss very much, I think, just about anywhere in India or even across the world, is the single theater, single screen theater. So Kolkata had some insane single screen theaters. Okay, these were all set up mostly during the British Raj, and so MGM set up the metro movie hall themselves. So it's got like this like huge sweeping staircases inside, Art Deco building, massive screen. A New Empire had this bar with like portraits of semi-nude women on the wall, which used to obviously as a kid completely fascinate me. And there was Lighthouse, another famous movie hall. So these are all gone now. They've all become exactly the same multiplex replica of each other, where there's like absolutely no character left, nothing that makes them stand out in any way. And so it's, if you go to PVR Priya, it's exactly the same as going to PVR New Empire now. So I definitely miss that a lot.
So I've never lived in Calcutta. I'm a Probashi in that sense. I mean, my name doesn't indicate it, but my mom was Bong, and I think of myself as a Bengali. Grew up speaking that. And when I visited Calcutta a few years ago, what struck me walking through the streets was it's as if I walked through a time machine. That it felt like the 1970s are preserved here. There was a charming little rusting weighing scale where you had to put a 1 rupee coin or something to get your weight and all of that. And I mean, maybe I'm seeing it through the eyes of a tourist or an outsider, but it just felt very quaint in that way. And I started thinking about the good aspects of it and the bad aspects of it. And you and I, despite being a few years apart, I'm a few years older, are actually from that generation where a big shift happened, which is a shift in the rhythm of life while growing up, right? So even if there are neighborhoods in Calcutta which are exactly the same as they were once upon a time, I would imagine that for a Kolkata boy then and a Kolkata boy now, there is one significant difference, that while on the outside the pace of life and the rhythm of life may be the same, you have your smartphones where the rhythm is completely different. You're scrolling, swiping. Jonathan Haidt once pointed out that 90% of what we consume was produced in the last 3 days. So it's you're always in the immediate, going from sensation to sensation. What is sort of your feeling on that? Like in your childhood, like tell me about the texture of days in your childhood, because I'm guessing that today we have to calendarize me time, but I'm guessing back then it was all me time per force.
Oh, yeah.
That if you were bored, you had to read a physical book or pick up your guitar and play something for yourself. And mixtapes were so hard to make, good music was so hard to come by, cinema was so hard to come by, and yet I'm presuming you were a film lover since you remember these halls so vividly.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you would spend your time, how you discovered the music you love, how you got into cinema, how you got into reading. Give me a sense of that.
This is a very interesting question, because I think social media is really like changed life in ways that we still don't understand, but clearly it has completely changed everybody's lives. And I'm an old-fashioned person. I don't really like social media. I'm not really active on it, but yet I find myself, because of the genius of the architecture of these things, I find myself spending an inordinate amount of time on it. And then I think about what's happening to me, and I try to stop, but the next day the cycle continues. It's a big trap. And I if I have to be nostalgic about something, I would really like to be in a world without social media. Absolutely. I don't care about how much access now that we have to various things of great quality. And, like you can watch any movie, you can read any book, you can get any music that you want. Okay, maybe that has some good in it, sure. But I think the value of things gets completely lost because of this ease of access. And plus the fact that the architecture of social media does not allow you to really sit with one thing. It doesn't, the whole feeling of just being immersed in one book or being immersed in one movie, and and you've seen that movie, and then you don't have another movie to watch for, I think, maybe the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So you marinate in what that movie meant to you, and it leaves an impression. Now I can watch a fantastic movie today, and tomorrow I'll be watching something else, or maybe the same night I'll be watching another thing. I don't think that leaves the brain with enough space and room to play with what actually we have witnessed and seen. And I think that we are losing something really valuable here. with the ease and speed of access to every possible form of content there is in the world, anywhere in the world. It's all there on your phone. Um, and so, for example, I remember the first time I heard Kind of Blue, the Miles Davis record. And it came to me like it was really hard. Like there was no, and this is back when there was no, not even CDs. Okay, we were still playing cassette tapes, and I had no idea about jazz. I didn't know anything about Miles Davis. I met a friend who said, "Look, I had this, like, I just heard this amazing thing. Can do you get a blank tape? I will record it for you." So I went to his house with a blank tape. He recorded it for me. I went back to my home and I played it, and I remembered like just the first opening few notes when Miles Davis's trumpet, floats through the room. It felt like I had been like flung across like some bizarre universe. And then I remember like I listened to that tape nonstop for weeks on end, and as a result it has become such a part of me. Like even 30 years later, I know all the lines of every song that is on that record, and I don't know if that can happen to me anymore. That feeling of listening to one piece of music and getting completely, blindsided, dumbstruck, and then just staying with it for days and days. I think that's just not going to happen. But here's the interesting bit. I read somewhere, and I have no idea where I read this, but I read somewhere about somebody saying that, think about what it was like to hear music during Mozart's time. Because you only got to hear maybe one concert a year of a Mozart piece being played, and the rest of the time you had to make do with if you had a piano in the house, or if you knew a musician or something like that, and you could play it yourself, or another musician could play it for you. But it was always live. There were no recordings. You couldn't just put on, no, let's hear Mozart's symphony number, whatever, and just play the record, and that's it. No, so that had a completely different value. That, when you first saw a Mozart symphony being performed, you might be talking about it for the next 5 years, because that might be the amount of time that will lapse before you hear another Mozart symphony being performed. And so and then we had LPs, and now you can play it anytime you want, and now you have social media where you can access whatever you feel like anytime you want and play it. So I think we've always constantly moved towards this where we are now. I don't know if we are at full saturation yet. It does definitely feels to me like it is beyond full saturation. But with human beings, you can always expect more surprises and more ease of everything. And have you seen reminds me of that, what's that movie about the planet becoming a garbage dump, and this is an animated movie where the planet has become a garbage dump, and this little garbage cleaning robot is sent back to the planet. And what happens to that robot? Wall-E. So in that movie, you see what has happened to human beings. They basically sit on these mobile sofas which move around, and they have a little screen, and they never have to leave the mobile sofa. Everything happens to them as they're sitting there. That's it. I think that we are pretty much heading towards that's what our future is. That's what we I mean, and I wonder if people really want that. It seems like people really do want to just be able to sit on their sofa and never have to move ever. But that's kind of tragic as a thought. But Wally has it right. I think that's where we are headed. But during my childhood, yes, like I think things had a lot more value. I think time. I can't really explain how differently time moved back then and how it moves for me now. I don't know if there is a difference. There must be, but I'm not aware of it. But what I am aware of is what I was talking about, of the value of things. Summer holidays were spent reading a stack of books, and I think the joy that I found in just sitting around with a stack of books nothing else to distract me, and it's hot outside. Of course, there were no ACs back then, but Kolkata always has a nice breeze. So if you have a shaded tree or something like that, which I had, it's a fantastic experience. You just lie there in this balmy afternoon, this nice breeze, and you have these books, and you can completely get lost in the worlds that these books, portray. And for sure, that is how I found my love for literature, and I wanted to write books. I can remember like being 6 or 7 and thinking that, man, this is the thing to do. I want to be able to create worlds like this, and draw people in this way, and just keep them there, and of course that has become so much harder, and you have to like really make an event out of it now. Like, you have to say that, okay, and you have to post it on social media that now I'm taking a break from Instagram and I am going to read my books, and things like that. So yeah, that's how it was.
You know that that dilemma that you spoke of, that things are coming at you so fast, you can't marinate. What sums that up for me is what I describe to people as my annual vacation. So every year I tell people that I take an annual vacation, but it is in Bombay itself, which is when the Mami Film Festival happens. So because it's the best of world cinema coming at you, so typically I will go there and I will try to maximize. So essentially over the 8-9 days it happens, I'll watch like 5 films a day, and etc etc. And at one level it is heaven, because I'm getting to see the best of world cinema, and it's such a beautiful thing. At another level, it's a little crazy that there's no marination time. The moment one film ends, you're quickly running and you're finding your way to the other venue where your next selected film is, and it feels a little crazy like that. So I guess that's a sort of dilemma that there is. Let's double click more on the reading part now, the books part. What were the sort of books which were making an impression on you, that drew you in, that kind of made you sort of go further into the world of reading? And I'm assuming that books were available to you at home, and etc etc. So what were your favorites back then, and over time did that shape from that age your self-image as a writer, that this is what I want to do? And were you writing back then, for example, as a kid?
Yes, actually, there's a pretty direct connection, because right from the beginning, the things that really drew me were adventure stories and mystery stories. I had these little collections, adventure stories for boys or mystery stories for boys, things like that. That my dad used to get for me. Actually, he also enrolled me in a library when I was about 8 or 9 years old, which is again a thing that almost doesn't happen anymore. Who goes to libraries? But back then, oh my god, it was the most exciting thing ever to be able to go into this space with so many books and to be able to pick the thing you want. And oh god, it was so exciting. I can still feel it. And and so yeah, so and from the beginning, I really liked reading adventure stories and mystery stories, and both like the usual suspects in English, like Enid Blyton and things like that. And I'm talking about as a child, as well as Bengali literature has a very rich tradition of adventure and mystery stories, which includes of course Satyajit Ray and Feluda. I'm an absolute Feluda nut. I love the character. I think he's brilliant. The books are brilliant. Beautiful portrayals of Kolkata and
And would
Bengali.
you read these in the original Bengali?
Oh yeah, and Bengali society, and and they have real feel. And there was Kaka Babu was another character. This man who used crutches. He had like one half a leg was missing, and he had another like young boy as an accomplice, just like Feluda had Topshe. And they would go on these adventures, and so there were a lot of these detectives in Bengali literature. And during Durga Puja, there is this thing where all the established magazines in Bengal would take out this special Durga Puja edition, which was this really fat, thick Puja Barshiki, as it's called, and those would be filled with these detective stories and by famous Bengali authors who have written just for the magazine. magazine for that edition, and I used to love those stories. Shandesh was this amazing magazine that was brought out by Satyajit Ray, Leela Mujumdar, his aunt, all great authors. And Shandesh again carried these amazing children's stories and adventure stories, ghost stories, mystery stories. I used to love those. I had a I was not much into literature per se as like in school. This is the stuff that I liked. But by the time I was in high school, I started really getting attracted to things like Wuthering Heights, for example, was a huge favorite. I must have read it like 10 or 11 times in 1 year after reading it for the first time. I thought it was an incredible novel. And there was again some fantastic Bengali short stories, Bengali novels as well. I remember one which is also a movie called Pad, which is about this couple. It's an almost dialogue-less story about this couple in a village who have to cross this river that is in Spate, and they have this a herd of buffaloes with them, and they have to cross together. They've just got married and they're very shy with each other, but they have to do this almost life and death thing together to cross this river, and that's what the story is about. And it's a fantastic story that's also been turned into a movie. By the time I was in high school, there was no genre. It was just everything that appealed, and I don't know what appealed to me. Anything that really made an impression, I was okay. I didn't care about what genre it was in. And then I went to college to do literature, and of course things changed radically, because then I was really exposed to amazing works of literature and a variety of it. And of course, between my friends and my professors and my coursework, so many new authors, so many new genres and books. And Philip K. Dick and science fiction, for example, I suddenly discovered science fiction, and Philip K. Dick blew my mind. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Ursula Le Guin, and then I discovered also police procedurals, which is what I wrote. And before that, my thing about detective fiction was Sherlock Holmes and Feluda, and the old-fashioned one, almost superhuman man who can see everything and know everything, and he comes like an avenging deity and solves the problem. And from there, to discover that also there's this genre which is very real, very gritty, and which talks about society and people at a particular time and place, and really brings that to life through the medium of a crime being committed. That was also new for me when I was in college, and that again I got very addicted to that genre. Graphic novels was a huge thing. So Neil Gaiman, Sandman, Persepolis, Marjane Satrapi, the Buddha series by Tezuka. Yeah, so college really blew my mind. Like, I was just like, I didn't know what had happened. My world changed. I was just like completely drowning in this world of wonder, of beautiful literature and beautiful words. And yeah, so I always had like a thing for adventure and mystery, yes, but I am quite free. I will read anything.
I'll come back to reading and literature, but let's take a digression and talk about language. Like, I recorded yesterday with Narayani Basu, who's done this excellent biography of Panikkar, K.M. Panikkar. And the one interesting thing about Panikkar is that he lived almost two completely separate lives. And one was in English and one was in Malayalam. And Malayalam was where his private self, his artistic self expressed itself, where all the poetry came and everything. And English was all talk of politics and statecraft and foreign policy and maritime history and all of that stuff, right? And that reminded me of something I learned from Peggy Mohan when she was on the show. She told me that she pointed out that a lot of Indians may think of themselves as bilingual and multilingual, but actually they're not. They are diglossic, which basically means that in a particular context, it is not that you're equally at ease in two languages or three. You have different languages for different contexts, and that's where they kind of remain. So your private life could be in one language, your secret life could be in one language, as it were. Like, sometimes, like when I fall very ill and I have fever and all that, I'll dream in Bengali, but otherwise I don't use the language at all in my everyday life, right? When I'm speaking Hindi with someone, there is a certain flavor to it. And I wonder what is sort of your experience of that, both in your own life and in what you've kind of seen around you. Because, for example, when it comes to the wrestlers of Haryana, I would imagine that Haryanvi and Hindi would be two very different languages for them. That in Haryanvi, when they're speaking to people in their village, it is one thing, it is one world that they're in. But when they're speaking in Hindi to other wrestlers from elsewhere, it is another thing. And if they have to speak in a halting English when they go abroad for tournaments, it is another thing. Equally, when I think of, say, the character ACP Sophia from your book, right? She's JNU educated from an elite family, and when she's speaking in English with her PhD friends and all of that, she's one person, and she would be an entirely different person when she's speaking in Hindi and the chalk, and maybe there are other lives and other contexts. So what is it for you? Because I have done all of my reading, all of my immersion in the world of imagination and ideas, unfortunately, is only mainly through English, right? I haven't read Bengali books, I haven't read Hindi books per se. I mean, Hindi books a long time back. So what is it for, since you've read literature in both these languages, what has it been for you, and how do you feel? Like, first of all, are there therefore two selves, and do they interact with each other? How do they inform each other? How do they deepen and enrich in your life?
Well, I have to say that I pretty much think and dream and write and speak in English. That's the language that feels most comfortable and most me by far. If something had to happen effortlessly in my head, it happens in English. It doesn't happen in. I don't dream in Bangla, and I don't think in Bangla either. But at the same time, I have a very good grasp of Bengali, not just at the level of words or language, but at the level of the cultural context behind the sentences or whatever. So I'm a big fan of Baul music, for example, which is and Baul music lyrically is always full of double meanings and hidden meanings and things like that, and the context to it is very rural Bengal, but I understand all of that, and I feel it as well. Like, and I've been to rural Bengal enough to know these things and see these things. So it's not just secondhand. I actually have first-hand experience of what this music is talking about. And even though these experiences has not been a big part of my life, and it has been a long time since I've had it, they are so well ingrained that I can immediately relate, and I know the double meanings. I know exactly what is being said. So culturally, I have absolutely no problem grasping anything in Bengali. By myself, I don't think or dream or do any, the only time I speak Bengali is when I'm speaking to my family or I'm speaking to my friends, and even then it is so mixed up with English anyway. And I don't think that I can even write in Bengali anymore, which is unfortunate. But I have, at some point of time, I used to berate myself about this. No, you must get back to it and must keep in touch. And I'm like, I'm too old to berate myself about anything. I don't care. If I've forgotten something, I've forgotten it. But I'm pretty much monolingual in that sense, right? And you said that, yes, language in different contexts. So Bangla again, the context in which Bangla happens to me is through literary works or through music or through movies. That is where I really connect to the language. Not so much when I'm speaking to friends and family, because again, like I said, it's very mixed up. To a certain extent with cuisine also. So, and when I'm thinking of food or I'm thinking of cooking, I might think of a lot of things in Bangla terms. Because I, again, grew up knowing these things in Bangla and learning how to cook with my parents. So that's what Bangla is, a very cultural language for me in that sense. It's the context is cultural. Every day, everything is in English. And Hindi is my language of facilitation. It's the language that I will use in any place that I am in. Like I said, I was in Bangalore, so I used it with a little bit of fear, like, oh my God, somebody's going to beat me up for speaking in Hindi. But of course, that obviously did not happen. But Hindi is what I will speak anywhere else in India, including here, including when I was with the wrestlers in Haryana, and they spoke in Haryanvi, but I spoke in Hindi, and Yeah, and if there was a language that I wish I knew, it would be Haryanvi, because I spent so much time with them, and not knowing the language, and they gave me so much access to their lives, the wrestlers, because I was I was living with them, I was in their house, I was living with their families, and for days and weeks, and so and they I became part of the furniture. So of course they would like speak to themselves all day long and laugh and cry in Haryanvi, and I'm like an outsider. I don't really know what they're saying. I can feel their emotions, but I have no idea what was said. So it felt a little odd to me, and that feeling of being an outsider at all times is strange. And so yeah, if I knew Haryanvi, I would love it, but I don't. But yeah, that's my relationship with language.
Tell me about your relationship with music. You've, of course, mentioned Kind of Blue. I've seen you on Instagram play the blues on your guitar, play Bach's music. So, take me through what are the other things? Like, okay, Miles Davis is obviously a landmark, then discovering him and discovering jazz. But what was that journey like? What are the other landmarks? What became part of you?
Blues was a huge thing, and again, I have absolutely no idea why it happened, but it just happened. It was just again in college is basically when this happened. Before that, my before college, I liked music, but my exposure to music was basically limited to what was on MTV, and that's neither here nor there. It's just some stuff. My parents were not that much into music. My mom had a fascination for only Rabindra Sangeet, but I found Rabindra Sangeet utterly boring. I might be lynched for saying this, but I still find it utterly boring, and I can't wrap my head around why anybody would listen to it. And then to be fair, they're lyrically beautiful, I get that, but just I can't get with the music, unless it is being sung, or it's in a Satyajit Ray movie, and then it becomes a different thing. But mostly no. And my dad used to like some English music, Neil Diamond and stuff like that, which I also loved back then. But I was not that much into it till I again went into college, and I found myself, I think, very luckily among a lot of people who are very, very passionate about music, were musicians themselves. And so I was suddenly, just like with literature, you know introduced to this bewildering world of different kinds of music, and people who are very knowledgeable about it. They could sing, they could play, they had stuff that they had downloaded, or by that time people were burning CDs and all that stuff was happening. So they had people who had huge collections. A particular friend of mine had massive collections of music, and he was basically the kind of center around which a big circle had formed of people who liked different kinds of music, would always go to his house and say, King Shukda, let me burn this. Can I get this album? Can I get that album? And he would be like also taste making, right? He would be saying, have you heard this now? And I was like, no, give it to me. Frank Zappa. Oh, Frank Zappa. I've never heard his name, but then I put on Frank Zappa and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Give me more. And so King Shuk was this like center of the world for us with music, and so that's how I got introduced to various kinds of music, and the Beatles were one of the first things that I fell in love with. It's so easy to fall in love with the Beatles, right? They're pioneering. Everything they've done is amazing. The Rolling Stones, a lot of the 60s and 70s musicians, and somewhere along that line, I started hearing Muddy Waters and things like that. The people who inspired the Rolling Stones or inspired, and I found that music very, very like touching. It really did something deep inside of me, and so I got into the blues heavily. And a lot of guitarists in the scene who could play the blues, so I started learning how to play it. It's not hard to learn the basics of blues. It's hard to play it really well, but not hard to learn the basics. So and that's how I got into the blues. And from blues, jazz was again a very obvious step. Again, jazz is completely based on the blues. Django Reinhardt was another. I remember an artist when I heard him for the first time. I was like, man, what is this? What is happening here? How can this music be so beautiful, so melodic, so harmonic, and yet like played in at that speed with that kind of facility? And then I discovered that he didn't have two fingers on his guitar playing hand. I'm like, wow, with three fingers. And so, gypsy jazz, Django Reinhardt, absolute genius. Then baul music also, because again, I had a friend who's now quite a big baul artist called Shattoki. And he used to just sit on the stairs just under where our classes used to happen, and with his dotara, and sing these songs which were just mind blowing. And then that's how I got into baul music. And he would explain to me what the lyrics meant, because I couldn't understand anything, because like I said, it's all double meaning. On the one hand, it seems like it's talking about sex, but actually it's talking about devotion to God. So, so that stuff is happening. And so Shattoki introduced me to baul music. He took me to baul melas, and we went together to all these different rural Bengal places. I remember even spending a night on this field with this like full of villagers who had just come there to listen to baul music, and everybody was cooking their own food on firewood and little pots, and bowls were singing wherever you could find them, and people were getting very drunk and very stoned, and it was basically, it's like Woodstock but in rural Bengal, and a very rural Woodstock. There was nothing urban about it whatsoever. I think maybe me and Chattoki and a couple of other friends were the only city folk around, and so we stood out also. We were dressed differently from everybody else, but nobody cared. It was okay. We didn't get fleeced, or nobody came to us for money. I anyway think we looked very poor. And we could easily join into this craziness, and it was truly crazy, because it went on all night, and as it went on all night, there was no limit to how much alcohol or ganja you could consume. People were consuming, and men and women both, and so it became more and more frenzied. The music became more frenzied, the dancing became more frenzied, and I was like, man, this is it, this is the thing. So baul music, amazing. And a lot of I was dissing Rabindra Sangeet before this, but here's the thing: a lot of Rabindranath's songs are actually baul tunes, just really gentrified baul tunes. He's taken like the raw, very rural, very earthy tune, and he's made it into this very soft, very lilting city thing. And I think I object to that kind of appropriation in a way. Though of course Rabindranath did a lot for bauls. He made no secrets about his love for them, and even now the biggest baul mela in Bengal happens in Shantiniketan. It was started by his initiative that started it. So yeah, that's music for me: jazz, blues, and baul.
Yeah, so my exposure to baul is very limited and very gentrified, in the sense that the only baul music I've heard is Pabandas baul in one of those real world records. So that's about all there is. And I wonder if do festivals like that still happens, like the rural baul festivals and all that, they happen?
Oh yeah, the rural baul festivals still happen. The bauls are still very much active and around, and they still get on the local trains and the in rural buses, and they sing. And the Posh Mela, the big festival in Shantiniketan, still happens as well. Again, I haven't been there for many years. I know that they happen because I know my friends go and they perform as well. Shattoki performs everywhere. The rural life is also something that is disappearing quite quickly in India, and I see this in my. I have much better experience, real life experience with wrestlers in Haryana, where I see how quickly their rural life, when I was writing this book in 2016, I was researching between 2012 and 2016. That's the 4 years that I spent in rural Haryana. And now when I go back to these same places, to the same wrestlers' houses, the changes are impossibly large. It's almost incomprehensible to me how much change there has been. And I wonder when I go there now whether in rural Haryana, wrestling will continue to hold the same importance that it once held, because For example, if I go to a village, and a journalist friend of mine, Jonathan Selvaraj, actually pointed this out to me, and I've noticed it, but I never thought of it this way. But he was the one who actually said that this is why you don't see so many wrestlers now. Is that if you go to a particular Haryana village, let's say somewhere near Hisar, where I used to go and meet this one wrestler, I remember that village was super rural, all wheat fields and small houses and single story houses. Every house had cows and buffaloes and things like that. The roads were narrow and kacha. The highway was far away. Um, and and all the children at that point, there were only boys, but sooner, like by 2016, when Sakshi Malik won the Olympic medal, the girls also started joining. For every single child in that village, there was only one sport to play, and that was wrestling. That was their thing. It was a cultural thing. Their fathers would tell them that, I was a wrestler, your grandfather was a wrestler, your great grandfather was a wrestler, wrestling is in our blood, and all of that stuff. And go to the akhada, you touch the akhada ki mitti, and without that you are nothing. And so everybody would, the akhada mitti was this very sacred thing for them. Every child was wrestling. Now that same village has become a part of the city. There are full roads. None of the houses are one storied anymore. They're all 2 to 3 stories. Some of them are high rises. And there are now restaurants and shopping malls, tennis courts, and golf course close by, and a boxing ring, and a swimming pool, and a cricket academy. Now, it has completely changed the face of that place. I'm not judging it. I'm not saying good or bad, but that relationship with wrestling and mitti and akhada and rural life that was once true for this place is definitely no longer true. Now you might go into wrestling because, okay, you have a very strong family tradition, because you are really passionate about it, okay. But you also have the choice to go swim, or to play cricket, or to play football, or to play golf, or any of these other sports. And obviously a lot of kids and a lot of families will opt for different things. Not everybody will say go and wrestle. And what I'm trying to say is, I think that same thing is happening everywhere, and I don't know this for sure, but I think in Bengal, because Bauls are so tied to the rural roots of Bengal, that I don't see how long they can survive, or how important or relevant they will be as we get more and more urbanized. But you said that your introduction to Baul is through gentrified songs. I mean, Pawan Das Baul, but Pawan Das Baul is a fantastic singer. He's a great Baul.
He's amazing. What I meant was that I heard the Western productions of him
Right,
by
with
Rail
bass
Gur.
guitar and
all of
nice
those. I
little-
mean, that's how I discovered Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan also
Okay,
before I
yeah.
went to the other stuff.
So you can go and listen to some Pawan Das, which is in the real setting with Khomok, Aktara, Dotara. It is insane. And of course, you can immediately see that the power of the music is very different when it is using the instruments that belongs to it, and not just I mean, I'm again nothing against bringing in different kinds of instruments, but at least I've heard all the Pawan Das recordings, okay? At least with him, the Western stuff is nice, but you're right, it is gentrified, it becomes a little softer, it becomes a little different. That raw thing goes away a bit. Absolutely.
So I want to ask you a question about the exact changes that you pointed out. Like, I think at one point, wrestling in Haryana would have been basically a technology for upward mobility. And as other technologies come in, they start getting used as well, and they start competing, and there's a great flattening sound. Now, there are two simultaneous processes I want to talk about, and tell me what you feel, because they go in sort of opposite directions. And one is an inevitable homogenization that happens when there's urbanization and when there's when a mainstream culture pops up. For example, you might be a kid in a small town in Haryana and you're speaking Haryanvi and it is incomprehensible to anyone outside, and you go to a city and Hindi is a completely different language. But the incentives are such that when you go to the city, first of all, you're made to feel infra-dig because you're speaking a quote-unquote vernacular, and therefore eventually you learn Hindi and your family learns Hindi, and that's where the movement goes. So if you move to the city, in a generation you stop speaking Haryanvi, you move to Hindi, that's a flattening sound. Vikram Doctor did an episode on Indian food with me where he spoke about a similar flattening sound happening in the world of bananas. That India has many kinds of bananas and we export the Cavendish banana to the world. Then for a variety of reasons like economies of scale and how long it lasts, it becomes a dominant banana in the world. Our banana colonizes the world of bananas, and then it comes back and now the Cavendish banana is wiping out other bananas, and there's a great flattening sound. And it happens with languages where dialects get taken over by languages. A language is a dialect with an army basically, and that kind of takes over. So this is one lament that you can have, but there's a countervailing force, and I discovered this when I spoke to Vinay Singhal of Stage.in, which calls itself the Netflix for Bharat. But a Netflix for Bharat not in terms of doing Hindi content or Bengali content or Tamil content, but in terms of doing content in the dialects, Haryanvi being one of them. And what has happened there, and that is wildly successful. When I recorded with him, they were charging Netflix rates and they had a few lakh subscribers. And that content is wildly successful. There's been a reverse migration from Bollywood, in the sense Haryanvi kids who went to Bollywood to be part of that industry came back to make Haryanvi content because it was doing very well. And the quality is irrelevant. The important thing is that it's in Haryanvi. And Vinay mentioned that many kids come up to him and they say ki, Bhaiya, for the first time in our lives, I felt proud of my language. I felt proud ki Haryanvi bol raha, I felt proud ki Bhojpuri bol raha, and etc. etc. And what I think therefore technology also does is that while that great flattening sound happens, but equally technology and markets open this thing in the other direction, where you can keep your niche culture alive, where gradually in different areas of our life, the mainstream is getting less and less relevant and there is more space for niches to thrive. For example, sitting in Bombay, I can now access all of the Baul music you spoke about, and you can just send me those links and I can access all of them. And if there is someone who grew up singing Baul music but was forced to then do Bollywood songs, can now move back and do his own music, and because of technology and find a dispersed audience which is still large enough for him to sustain himself. So what is your sense of these? That on the one hand there is that great flattening sound for understandable reasons, but at the other hand, there is also the chance to keep some of this stuff alive where that would not have been possible otherwise.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I see this again in the world of music, especially, is that I have never seen as much interest in jazz and blues and Django Reinhardt and Miles Davis and all the early musicians, or even bowls, as there is now. This is because of social media. There's more people watching this, more people making this content, young musicians who are playing these 1940s 1920s songs. So yeah, but like to be honest, I don't have much of an answer here to offer. I see what you're saying. I see the effects of it. Yes, absolutely, that effect exists. Yeah, I mean, culture works in strange ways. The Bengalis who I know who grew up in the US had so much pride in their Bengali-ness and Bengali literature and music and all of that, and they knew everything about everything. And me, I was growing up in Kolkata. I knew all about Muddy Waters and and Miles Davis, but I didn't know much about Rabindra Sangeet. So these forces and counter forces are very interesting and I think quite unpredictable as well. And I don't know where any of this can go, but certainly there are big changes are underfoot, is what I can say. Yeah.
So earlier you were mentioning, some of the books, some of the music that influenced you. And the thing is, whenever I speak with guests of my age or an older vintage, I would have read all the books they mention and vice versa. And I would have heard all the music they mention and vice versa. And that's a common ground of reference. For someone who is 15 today, when they speak to their peers 25 or 30 years later, that won't be the case because, and I think it's a good thing, that tastes are much more fragmented and that there isn't isn't one mainstream which everyone is perforce consuming, that if you're growing up in 1970s, 1980s India, you will read Enid Blyton at a certain age and you will move on to Tolkien at another age and so on and so forth. But that's no longer the case. You have many, many more niches and etc. etc. And I think sometimes about how we connect with other people. Like, again, something that happened for our generation was we were able to move from forming communities of circumstance to communities of choice. Earlier, your community is your people in school, your people in your neighborhood, your people in your workplace. Today, we form communities of choice, and a lot of that is on shared interests. A lot of that could be, kind of blow your mind as well, and then that immediately becomes a connection. Like, whenever I meet someone who's, say, a fan of Tom Waits or Mark Strand or Mary Oliver, I just know that, okay, there's an instant connect that you have made with that person. So to what extent have sort of cultural connections played a part in the communities of choice that you have formed? How important is it?
Oh, very important. Firstly, I think that it's probably become easier to form communities of choice now, right? Like, it must be much easier.
Much easier.
And since people can share so much and so easily, it's also, you can like really be active with that here. But I think that once I was in high school and then in college, I think all my communities are communities of choice which began from a cultural point of view. It's because we had common books or common music or common movies that we were very, very interested in and obsessed about, and then and that is definitely where it began. And as you grow older, I suppose, or at least I will just speak for myself. As I've grown older, I realized that similarities in cultural similarities it don't always make for lasting friendships, and so you need other things. You need other emotional connections, which may or may not form through these cultural communities. And so friends are, as I've grown older, I've lost friends who I thought, oh my God, like this is my soulmate because he likes the blues, and then that doesn't really work. So now I am much less concerned about cultural communities. Actually, I like to connect with people with no real idea or understanding of why I'm connecting with them. I try not to care about, this person likes that or this, because again, as I've grown older, I've realized that also liking certain things does not mean that you might be a good person or a person who somebody I can emotionally connect with, or or vice versa. So I leave those things out nowadays. And one of the good things that happens with that is that I get to experience various different things that I would have not experienced before, because I would have closed that door because of the cultural gatekeeping. So now I might if somebody tells me, listen, I have a great Justin Bieber song, 5 years back I would have been like, please never talk to me again. Now I might be like, okay, let's listen to it, and maybe I won't like it, doesn't matter, but I will at least listen to it, and I will certainly not judge the person for liking Justin Bieber. I'll be totally fine with and I'll get to know other aspects of that person that connect with me. And so I think in the beginning, the cultural aspect of it was the only thing that really drove me to form communities, and now it's not really that anymore.
Are you still in touch with King Shuk? What happened to him?
Oh, for sure. I am very much so. Yeah, I am in touch with him, and still we meet regularly. We play music, and we still exchange music and books. And he will still bring out a book for me and say, "Here, I bet you haven't read this." And it's like some really obscure. Like he did this the last time we met. He brought out this obscure short story from the 1920s from an obscure magazine that has long disappeared, and it's some story that he really liked. I actually haven't read it yet, but since he's given it to me, I know for a fact that it'll blow my mind. It's like, I trust his taste, and he had printed it out and bound it very nicely in a little thing, and he was like, "Here, this is for you." I'm like, "Thank you." So yeah, that relationship continues very strongly still.
Tastemakers are the most awesome people. So let's go back to reading, the kind of stuff that you were reading. Like, I remember one of the most delightful discoveries of my life was also discovering the kind of crime fiction you speak of, where, earlier I was fully into the Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, the fiction of the 1930s and 40s, which, Martin Edwards has written about so well in this book called The Golden Age of Murder. Have you read it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great biography of that period. But then I think the first modern crime fiction I discovered was Sewall and Walu, when I read Roseanne and their series of 10 books, and that sort of opened a different kind of world to me and made me respect crime fiction as something that is not just a genre that you keep it separate, but it is a stuff of life itself. It has everything.
Yes.
And obviously one goes on to make similar discoveries with science fiction and all of that, that these, you shouldn't call them genres and put them in a corner. They tackle the big questions of our times. So tell me about, firstly, those kind of shifts that you made in your reading, including into that kind of crime fiction. And also, secondly, how was your self-image evolving during these times? Like, what was the story you told yourself about yourself? And was part of it that I want to write? Was part of it that I want to write this kind of crime fiction or this kind of book? Or that I want to be a musician and I want to make this kind of music? Like, did you dream of that as well? What did you daydream about when you were a teenager?
I dreamt of being on stage with Miles Davis and Muddy Waters. Yeah, sure. I was. I am a daydreamer. Or I used to be a lot more when I was a teenager. Not so much now, and in a comfortable way. Not like some cynical way. In a nice, comfortable way. I now know a lot more about my abilities and what I really feel like doing and what I don't feel like doing. Which, as a teenager, you don't have any ideas about these limitations. Not limitations, I wouldn't say, but about who you are. So my daydreams were wild. I was like, I thought that I could do anything. Really, I thought I would be, if I really wanted, I would be a great musician, and I would be a great musician in any of like a 5 or 6 different genres, and so I played as well in college and stuff, and on stage, and it was really enjoyable while it lasted. But soon enough, I realized that I don't have that kind of love for music that I can sustain myself as a professional musician, which is a very hard life, and full of uncertainties, very difficult to earn money, and of course almost impossible to quote unquote truthful to the music that you like and you want to play and still make money. That happens to like the absolute minuscule 0.01% of people make that happen, and they are of course the stars. But apart from that, everybody has to do everything. You got to do your ad jingles if you want to make money and all of that. So anyway, I realized, and not in a good way, but in a very conflict-ridden way, that this is not for me. Okay, and I was upset with myself, and I thought, okay, I just don't practice enough, and none of those were true. Now, in hindsight, I realized that what is true is that the thing that I ended up doing, which is writing, was always going to be what I would end up doing, because that was the thing that really I was interested in the deepest possible way, in a way that I was not interested in anything else. That was by interest. I what I mean is that's how I wanted to express myself. I wanted to express myself through writing more than I wanted to express myself through music. In my daydream, equally as a teenager, equally a writer and a musician, and also sometimes a footballer, and so also sometimes winning the World Cup, and India is playing the World Cup, and I'm playing on the right wing and things like that. So lot of daydreams, but the thing I stuck to, whether or not I wanted to or not, was writing. It was what it came naturally to me. If I was feeling really down about something, I would write about it. If I was feeling really happy about something, I would write about it. Even the exciting daydreams about being a musician or being a footballer turned into writing. I would write about that. And And so writing was and this I did not actually I did not know about myself till quite late. Is what is my safe space. It's the place where I want to be. It's where I want to spend my time. It's my me time. It's the thing which gives me most joy, most comfort, and all of those things. And even if nobody reads it, if I really want to express myself, if I will write it down, and I will write it, and I will read it myself and feel very happy about life. you know I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes perfect sense to me when I do it. So yeah, I was I realized this only when I was writing my wrestling book, is that how much I'm in love with it. Before that, it was, I knew I was writing, and I knew I wrote reasonably well enough to for people to want me to write for their publications and make some money out of it. So I quickly turned it into my profession. And but the deep love for it, which goes beyond profession, beyond making money, beyond like any reasonable or rational expression, that I started discovering when I started writing my wrestling book. Because I went into writing that wrestling book with deep misgivings about my abilities to pull off a book. And I'm like, these people, they've given me so much access, they've shown me their lives, I've taken the notes, all of that I've done. But I know that I'm going to do a very bad job when I sit down and write about it. It'll be awful. It'll be unreadable. It'll be this like thing. But so this kept me like in this like prison of anxiety for some time before I actually started writing. When I started writing, I suddenly saw that anxiety went away. Those expectations and voices in the head were just quietened down, and I was just enjoying the writing, and I enjoyed it more and more as I got deeper and deeper into it. And at some point I realized, man, this is a lot of fun. I am built for this. I know how to do this. I like doing this. Whether it's good or not is not the point. The point is that in the process I am loving it. And that's how it was with my second book as well. Again, and the anxiety was a lot less, even though I was doing fiction for the first time, and I had to kind of teach myself how to work in the framework of fiction, and what is permissible, what's not, and all of that stuff, and how to structure a narrative. Firstly, the anxiety was very low, and secondly, the enjoyment of the process was very high. So and that basically, it really told me that this is what I should be doing.
There's such a lovely lesson in there. Like, the blurb on your novel, of course, is by Nilanjana Roy, and she was on my show once, and we spoke about the different ways you can want to be a writer, right? There's a framework of thick and thin desires, where thin desires are desires you might feel intensely, but you only feel that way because that's what the world expects you to want, or it's very based on validation. And the thick desire is what you intrinsically want. And as a writer, the way we thought of it is that there is a thin desire that you want to be acclaimed for your work, you want to win awards, you want to get the Booker Prize, you want to do this, you want to do that. But there is a thick desire that you just want to sit down and experience the magic of filling up a blank page. And the fact that you've got to that thick desire relatively early in your life and could actually do that for a living is pretty mind-blowing. Let's go back to the college years. Like, you're doing an MA in English literature from Jadavpur, right?
Yeah,
So
Jadavpur.
what was college like? How did you change through college? Like, there are these simultaneous anxieties young people go through, two anxieties. And one is the anxiety of figuring out who you are and what you want to do. And the other is the anxiety of winning the approval of others, especially at that age, right? And these jostle with each other. Sometimes you put on a mask because you think that'll get you accepted in the world, but is that really you? How do you figure that out? What was that journey like for you? Like, for some people, they figure it out really early. For some people like myself, it takes a lot of time to sort through that. What was it like for you?
Okay, so this is a very complicated question, okay? And it involves very complicated things which I will not fully go into. But I will say this, that I think you already know from what I said about college is that I found college to be a magical place. Um, Again, and this is like I'm talking externally to myself. This is not me, my internal self, but externally, it was, and I have like so many years later, I look at it and I see it, and I see it even if I can see it like without dispassionately and kind of rationally. I will still say that it was a magical time. It was full of very special people who were non-judgmental, who were kind, who were interesting, who had various interesting things happening in their lives which they were only too happy to share with you. Jadavpur University, the English department had a very cool and welcoming atmosphere about it. Teachers told you first day of class that, look, we have no system of attendance and stuff like that. This is entirely voluntary. You come to my class if you are enjoying the class. Don't come to the class if you're not enjoying the class. And I remember hearing that for the first time, and it blew my mind. I'm like, what? And I because I was in school, in the missionary school, where if you are not in class, you get caned and your parents get called, and I didn't even know this about myself, but I really like freedom. I don't like the regimented wearing a tie and a new school uniform, which I didn't know till I took off the tie and the school uniform and first went to college and heard these things. And the way these things aligned with me, how natural it felt to me, I realized that this is what I really like, is people telling me that I have a choice. That here's the thing, you come if you like it, don't come if you don't like it. That's like the best thing anybody has ever said in my life. Okay, and immediately college became this magical place, and there were obviously a lot of amazing teachers, amazing teachers. And who were really deeply in love with literature themselves, who were really deeply in love with what they were teaching, and that makes a massive difference. And like I said, music, movies, books, and the freedom from all the restrictions of being of living with your family, which when you are in school, you have all these things. Okay, your parents want to know when you're going to come back home, where you are, what you are doing. Constantly there's a system of surveillance and questioning, and the moment I went to college, I realized that I can break free of all this. Like, I could just like actually stand up to my parents and say, don't ask me, I am going to college, I'll be back when I'm back. And that, like, it was life changing actually for me. And so that's one thing. The second thing, which is far more complicated, is I think that when you said putting on masks and things like this, I think that, and again, this is my experience, is that people who put on a mask or are not who they really are inside, or need to get validation, or all these things don't start when you are in college or when you are a teenager. This might feel you might feel it very strongly, but the putting on of the mask starts at a very, very young age. It starts very young. It starts from very early childhood trauma, which the child does not know how to handle or what to do with, and thus the child then learns that there are certain ways I can be, which can, if not prevent the trauma, at least make my life easier through it. And those things are like form foundational structures in a person. And as you grow up, that foundational structure expresses itself in various ways. In your teenager, it might express itself in one way. When you are in college, it might express itself in one way. So it expresses itself according to the circumstances and the surroundings that you have. But the structure is essentially the same. So despite the fact that my college life was magical and amazing, and I say life-changing in certain ways, it was life-changing, it did not change my foundational structures of things that I did to keep myself safe from perceived threats. In a way, that structure changes only, I think, when you directly work with it, which is when you are in therapy or in some other way where you have to confront it with the help of people. I don't think people can confront themselves, because these are unconscious, subconscious things that you don't really even know about yourself. But But these are the things that really fundamentally define you. And this is the tricky part of it. The fundamental things that define you, you don't know about yourself. You have to find out from somewhere else in a setting that allows it to be found. And so, yes, so, if you ask me how did that change me, yes, college changed me in very significant ways, in ways that I became much more I could speak to a lot of, I became very social. I became very social. I became interesting as a person, quote unquote, because I now knew music and movies and literature and things like that. I knew how to have fun. I became confident. I could walk into any room or in any setting and hold my place there, which was a very, very important lesson that I learned in college. I learned also how to learn, how to absorb things from the texts and things like that, how to learn in discrete steps, which in school you don't really learn. Learning is about it happens through some kind of fear, right? You have to, either the fear of teachers beating you up or your parents beating you up or you failing in an exam or one of those things. It's always a fear based thing. So fear based learning is not really learning. It's just trying to survive. Whereas in college, because there was absolutely no fear of anything. Nobody ever said anything about what is at stake anymore. Especially this is because this is a English literature course, right? This is not engineering or medical. Nobody has anything at stake here. So it's entirely up to you whether you want to learn or not. Then you start, I think, really figuring out what it is like to learn. How do you absorb things? How to do it in a discrete manner, in small little sections, and slowly give yourself time. How to break things down. All very important lessons. But emotionally, it made no difference. Emotionally, what I was at 5 or 6 or 10 or 15, or through college, or through my first decade of working life, I was the same. Till I actually had to confront my emotional self because of various personal reasons and had to go to therapy, and then some changes happened, some realizations happened, at least some awareness happened of why I am what I am or who I am, and in those things. So, and that is truly the life-changing bit.
I want to double click on the bit about learning how to learn. Like one of the, like I've mentioned this before and it'll embarrass you if I say it again, but I think Enter the Dangal is just a masterpiece. I read it as background reading when I was doing a feature on Sakshi Malik in 2016. And what I loved about the book was not just your storytelling or the world that you brought alive for me, but also the depth of knowledge that it contained and gave out so easily. Like you went into the deep history of wrestling, and there was so much in it, and that depth, I think, as much as the book shows and demonstrated to you your love for writing, I think it also demonstrated that love for diving into rabbit holes, about getting deeper and deeper into a subject and really figuring it out. So you don't just know it from the surface, but you know everything, you know all the whys, you know how the hows. And I'm guessing that is also connected with the phrase you used of learning how to learn. So tell me a bit more about that. Like, so me and my YouTube co-host Ajay Shah, we teach a course called Life Lessons, where we figured that we'll put together all the fundamental things you should learn as you go through life, but college never teaches you. And one of our webinars is, in fact, two of our webinars are called Learning How to Learn, where and I found that most of our thinking on that had to come from ourselves. There's no material anywhere that tells you how to learn in the modern age. So what was that like for you? Like, what is learning how to learn for you? And when you start getting into a subject, you said, breaking it down into discrete steps and proceeding. Tell me about that process of learning.
So I think to begin with, the first thing is something that I remember. Sushil Kumar, the wrestler, 2 Olympic medals, but now out on bail on a murder charge and everything. Yeah, but Sushil Kumar, who I spent a lot of time with while writing this book, I remember him saying this, and it sounds like a very cliched thing, but especially in the Indian context, I can't say about the rest of the world, but in the Indian context, this is like, I think the most important thing is he used to say and he used to teach a lot of kids. When he was on the mat, he would always have about half an hour where he would just be talking to all the little kids, and he used to tell everybody that Ask questions. There are no stupid questions. Ask questions. Anything you want to ask, ask. If you ask once, ask 2 times, ask 3 times, it doesn't matter. I am not going to scream at you because you asked me a third time or a fourth time because you didn't understand. I'm not going to scream at you and say, oh, I told you this yesterday. Just ask your questions, because that's the only way to learn. And I think why I said this is important in the Indian context is that, at least in my experience, we have a lot of this thing of, oh, you're so stupid. If you ask questions, you're stupid. That's a stupid question. At least in school, you always got the feeling that if you ask, unless you ask like this super intelligent question, then if you ask anything basic or fundamental, you're dumb. But the basic and fundamental is what is important. After that, everything is like a bonus. That's the really important stuff. Either create an atmosphere where no question is stupid, like with Sushil, or as I told myself, with Sushil, I was very comfortable because, I could see him saying this, so I could ask him stupid questions that I thought in my head, oh, that is so stupid, don't ask him this. But I'll ask him because I know that he this is how he is. And then I slowly started to tell myself that there are no stupid questions. Just ask whatever. Be very stupid. Actually, it's good for you if you are very stupid. You don't know shit. Be dumb. Like, you don't know the language. You don't know the culture. Haryana. You don't know rural life. You don't know agriculture. You don't know wrestling. You know nothing. Okay? So, like, give up all that stuff about being a sports journalist and you're like covering the Olympics and all of that. That's like, just forget about that. Be very, very dumb, be a child, and just ask and observe. And I think that really helped me, and I was very and I still am like that. I am very persistent and very pesky, and I will keep asking people about things, and I'll ask it in a way which I'm not saying I'm pretending to be dumb, but I will not try to couch my lack of knowledge. I'll be like, look, I don't know anything, like, tell me from the first step. And I see people are very kind, actually, when that happens. They don't. And I used to think in school that that's a very bad thing, but now I realize that's not. People are very happy to tell you when they realize that you don't know anything. It's okay. You don't know anything. I will tell you from, like, step one. So that's one very important thing. The other thing is to as much as possible try and learn step by step, which is what I meant by discrete. Is always take like small steps and slow steps. So this is one thing that is, for example, in learning music, it's like the most important thing. And it sounds simple, but it's actually not simple, because it involves a kind of patience and persistence, which is that, let's say you are learning a guitar solo. You will The best way to learn it is to take, the first 4 or 5 notes of the first measure, forget about everything else, and just play that very, very slowly. Learn that, then play it a little faster, then play it a little faster. As you get comfortable with each step on each speed on that first bar, you can finally take it to the speed at which the solo is being played. Then you go to the next bar. So that is it sounds like, oh yeah, of course that's the way to learn, but that's not how it works. If you have ever played music, you'll see when you sit down and you listen to the solo, you immediately want to play the whole thing at the speed at which it is being played, as fast as quickly as possible. You want it under your belt. But for some people that might happen. Some people have natural abilities to pick up things very, very fast. Everybody has different levels of how quickly they pick up things. It's good to know your level and be comfortable with your level and do it at that speed. Learn slowly, learn step by step. That's basically what I mean. So when I was writing my fiction, I told you that I taught myself how to structure it. What I did was and it's very cool that you spoke of Skewal and Walu, because I picked Rosanna as the book to dissect. So I loved Rosanna. I loved the Martin Beck novels. I think they're fantastic. And so I took Rosanna and chapter by chapter, I broke it down. I took chapter 1 and I sat with my notebook and I said, this is what happens in chapter 1. These are the things that are described. These are the characters that are named. How are the characters introduced? How are the relationships between the characters introduced? What is the purpose of the descriptions that are given, and all of those things, everything I wrote down and for each chapter. And then I looked at it to see how the things connect to each other as the narrative unfolds. How is a character built layer upon layer? How is the relationship between two characters? How do those things evolve over the structure of the narrative? How the description is stacked, and how, of course, the investigation proceeds as well. What are the clues? How the all of those things, and I learned from them also that it is okay to be true to the boring nature of an investigation. That investigations are boring. That questioning the best kind of questioning, then I saw it happen in real life with Delhi police, is the one where the same question is asked like 50 times over the course of 4 hours. And and that really is the nature of an investigation. You sit down for 4, 5, 6 hours with one person, asking him banal question after banal question, and then throwing in a question that's not so banal, and then circling back to where were you at this time, what were you doing, who were you speaking to, oh, but I already told you this, just say it again, no. And then that it's a very weird psychological trick that happens to in interrogation. But and Skiowal and Malu, if you look at it, they're very true to it. But of course, at the same time, they also have to condense a 6-hour interrogation into a few pages. So I learned also the technique on how to do that. Looking at that, like, how do you give the reader the impression that the interrogation is going on for a very long time, that the questions are repetitive in nature, that the questions are structured in a way to kind of trap the person being interrogated without actually putting into words the entire 6 hours, because that's obviously impossible. And very, very interesting lessons to learn. So I did all of that, like, very step by step, very chapter by chapter, and I took my time with it.
Awesome, and I'm going to double click a lot more into Rosanna and the Beast Within, because I loved the Beast Within also, by the way, but I never made a connection. I've read Rosanna many, many years ago, but I guess a lot of the connections would be invisible ones. I want to go back to learning for a moment, and I'll talk about both music and chess, different ways of learning, since you mentioned music. One way of learning the guitar, for example, could be the way most people learn, that you take a favorite song and then you figure out how to play it. Perhaps in this way, you figure out how to play it at half speed or bit by bit or whatever. You learn how to play it, then you learn a few chords of a few songs, and then you move on from there. And another way of learning would be to learn the theory, to figure out the why, to figure out that, okay, यहाँ पे solo है तो क्यों है, why is it going in this way, and to figure that shit out. Similarly, chess, which I know very well, and there also you have this bottom up and top down ways of learning. And the bottom up way would be that you just learn how the pieces move, and then you start playing, and as you play, as you gain experience, you figure shit out. And the other way is one where you learn the basic principles, where somebody tells you that, listen, space is important, so you got to occupy the center, and then the why behind a lot of things become clear. Or initiative is important, so develop your pieces quickly, don't move a piece twice in the opening, etc., etc. So the why becomes more clear. And the way of learning is always a combination of these two. It's never one or the other. It's an organic, just sort of diving into it and then thinking about the first principles. And what I find in my case is that I'll dive into something because it's beautiful, but very early in the game, I'm just trying to figure out those first principles and figure out those broad things and kind of go there. Like, for example, the why of why a Delhi cop will circle back in the way that you mentioned, that you'll ask a lot of banal questions and then you'll circle back to the key question and all of that. And the why for that would be in something about how the human brain works. And you can discover that through practice, through realizing that this happens, or you can discover it through being told about it, कि भाई ऐसे होता है. And I'm sure there are handbooks on investigation and forensics which will give you all these broad principles. So how does it work for you, that process of learning? Like, even in writing, you're throwing yourself into writing because you love sentences, you love telling stories. But as you go into the game, you take a step back out and you think about what kind of language should I use, or how do I structure this book? Like in this case, the example that you just gave of looking at Rosanna and then, sort of reverse engineering that is very much that approach where you try to, understand the mechanics of something, and then the whys become clear, and then it's so much easier to apply to your own work. So what do you think about like these two aspects and the part that they play in your learning?
I think that what you said is absolutely right, that you both aspects are at work at all times when you're learning. And for different people, again, different things become more important or less important, or come first or come later. That depends on your personality and how you approach things. Some people are much more natural. Some people like to work very from first principles upwards. And I have more of a tendency to be natural, but I find that going to the first principles is actually very helpful. So sometimes I forced myself to, I look at the natural stuff that I've done and I'm like, okay, this is very nice. Now let me see what in theory or in first principles, what that says about what I've just done, and see if I can work with, change it around accordingly, and so, and or what if at all it needs any change. So I'll do that. And also the cool thing is that I really like learning, so that's a very important thing. Like, I when I was writing, I faced I had a lot of different questions in my head, but none of these questions were questions that made me, as is often the case with people, and I think that's a big barrier to things, is that it makes you feel, maybe it makes you feel dumb, maybe it makes you feel stressed, maybe it makes you feel anxious, that why do I not know this? It's perfectly okay not to know this, and for me, I find that okay, when I don't know something, I'm very excited. Now I'll try and see if I can learn it. So for example, one of the big questions was, can I write dialogue? For me, because having been a journalist for many years and having written a non-fiction book, I never had to write dialogue. It was always what I actually recorded, and I was like, shit, when I have to come up in my own imagination with all these different characters who will have different voices and different personalities, how do I make that work? And then I started to look at that, for example, in not just Kyoal and Walu, but in Inspector Rebus, Ian Rankin. I started looking at it especially with the Japanese novelists. Hideo Yokoyama is a big influence. 6-4 is, like, I think the best police procedural ever written, ever. Like, it is the definition of a police procedural to me. And when you read 6-4, you see there's a very large cast of characters in very complicated relationships with each other and the institutions that they work with and the culture in which it is set. And you get a sense of all of that. You get a sense of the institution. You get a sense of the culture. You get a sense of the people themselves and their inner motivations, their external behaviors, their family lives, all of this. And it comes through in the dialogue. It comes through, and without really holding your hand. It's not like it's telling you, okay, this person is like that or this person is like that. No, nothing is being said. It's all being allowed to unfold in its natural way. And so 6-4, I really delved into 6-4 to look at language, to see how dialogue is being written, to show personality, to show different people from different walks of life, from different cultural contexts. And the first thing I realized, to my great joy, is that at the sentence level itself, you don't really need to change much. When you do that is like, a very cliched way of doing it. It's like giving somebody broad accents to show where they're from. Like, oh, you are a Bengali, so you must speak like our former president Pranab, and all the everything is Roshogulla khabe and all that. So no, that's like the broad way of doing it that you've given. So at the sentence level, you don't need to change things. It's a more subtle thing. It's the content of what they're talking about. And that content is not just based on the cultural background, but it is also based on their personalities and their personal experiences and their childhood experiences, and their biases in how they see the world. So I found that very exciting, that that in simple lines of dialogue, so much can be revealed or not revealed or held back about a person, and you do not have to do that in any kind of cliched broad way. So that was a very fun learning experience for me to write dialogue. And one of the things that really helped was that when I was with the cops doing my journalistic stories, I actually told them that, look, eventually I am going to write a fictional book based in your world, and I want it to be as real as possible. So I will have a recorder on at all times, but this will not go into like newspaper. This is just for us, for me to understand how you speak. So I had a lot of recordings. So I used the same technique I used in nonfiction, where I transcribed all these recordings, and this was the most painstaking long process that I did. I transcribed all those recordings, and I already obviously had real people in mind when I was forming my characters. And so I would take the dialogues from those real people that I had transcribed and see how it fits my character, and use it in that way. So it really helped me to have actual conversations, real life conversations to base my dialogue on.
One of the books which really blew my mind in terms of when I realized the power of translation is not even Rabasa's translations of Marquez, but Gillian Wright's translation of Rag Darbari. That when I read that, you actually got a flavor of how the Hindi original sounded just from the English translation, which blew me completely. And similarly, in your book, there are many of these moments where even though your dialogues are in English, they sound fairly authentic, but I'm wondering about how you kind of achieved that. Like, you have of course mentioned that you had many hours of recordings of people actually talking and all that, but can you give me an example of how, say, you take a particular phrase in Hindi, like some are easy. I mean, if someone says mother chod, it can become motherfucker and you get the flavor. But apart from that, everything isn't just a simple direct kind of translation like that. So can you give me an example of how you struggled with that yourself and the solutions that you found in getting the flavor across? Because in a sense, an act of translation is also an act of recreation, and you have to, in another language, recreate that same flavor of what is going on. And obviously different characters speak in slightly different voices. So take me through some of what that process was like for you.
So it's, again, the voices, the different voices, like I said, is based very much on the personality of people. So I know, for example, like the really abrasive personality, which is Parveen. He one of the things about being abrasive is that he's always asking why, and why is where there is no need to ask why. Why are you eating meat, or why are you doing this? So it's as simple as that. Like, I know he's abrasive, so he gets a lot of, he's constantly questioning people's choices and motivations and why somebody's doing that, which sometimes is very good in police line of work, but in all other relationships it can be really tiresome. And Kumar, who's Inspector Prashant Kumar, who's like a much more person with a lot of self-doubt, and he's a softer person. He doesn't really know whether he belongs anymore to the police world of police. So you will see that in his dialogue he's silent a lot, because he doesn't really know what to say, or he's trying to think about something. And so I put myself in his shoes, and I become reluctant about what I'm saying, and I see what comes out as I'm being reluctant, and I'll stick with that.
So it's like you're method acting for each character.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am sort of method acting for each character. And then there are so many considerations here. Then there's another thing of Meera, who's the wrestler turned cop and who comes from rural Haryana. Now, one of the ways that she, I show that she comes from rural Haryana, and is the fact that she has not seen a lot of city life, and lots of things are new to her. So she expresses surprise in those new things, and you can see that in the dialogue that that for her many things are new, and she'll ask a lot of questions about these things. And secondly, that the one thing I struggled with till my editor told me that it's totally fine, don't struggle with it, is phrases. So a lot of there's a lot of flavor in the Hindi phrases or Haryanvi phrases that even in my transcribed recordings I would be like, man, there is no way to translate this.
Like?
Ghoda bech ke so gaye. Okay, now for example, now how do you say "घोड़ा बेच के सो गए" in English? It makes no sense. Sold his horse and went to sleep. Makes no sense. So when I'm faced with something like that, my editor taught me this, is that just let it go. Just let it go in Hindi or Haryanvi, in whatever language you want the original phrase is in, and then either simply let it go, or if you want, you can in a different way, without really explaining what the phrase means, just play on it a little bit more. So for example, "Ghora bech ke so gaye," I might use that in Hindi, and then the next line might be that Inspector Kumar thought that he doesn't even have a horse to sell.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll keep it there. So now you have to figure out what is the connection between this line and that phrase, and through that the reader might understand or not understand, or get a sense or not get a sense, doesn't matter. But so a lot of different juggling acts in these things. And of course you said mother chod and motherfucker and all that, but I mean, the in police world and criminal world, the amount of gali that is used just as a word, punctuators, as every second or third word is like that. So that is quite an easy way to bring in flavor, and authentic as well. There's actually that is truly how it's being spoken. So in fact, the trick is, how much are you going to use? There is such a thing as too much on the page. Even if in real life it's like you use like out of 50 words 30 are expletives. If you keep on doing that in the book, that might feel very burdensome for the reader. So you'll have to think a little bit about that okay, I have given you the flavor, but I might not like stick to saying "Mother Chod" every second sentence, so that kind of decision making basically.
And writing dialogue is actually bloody hard, because the way we speak in our real lives is we're not speaking linearly one after the other in complete sentences. We are kind of speaking in half sentences, assuming the other person will pick up something. You're speaking over each other.
Yeah.
We are doing all of that. I remember there was this daily soap that Neena Gupta used to direct, which I think came on DD in the late 1990s, and I've forgotten the name, where I was absolutely blown away, because in that people were actually speaking the way they speak in real life, which I thought was impossibly hard to pull off, right? Because both cinema and literature have this sort of modified dialogue thing where you make it sound like it's an authentic conversation happening, but you're seeing it unfold linearly on the page. It's just the way that it is, I remember, reading Ann Tyler's use of dialogue was just a particular model of how bloody well it was done. So how did you grapple with sort of those aspects of it, that you want to be real, you want to kind of capture that, but the actual chaos, and I guess that chaos would be in your recordings, where you have different voices at the same time, is really hard to actually replicate on the page.
Yeah, so one thing that helped me was that I kept in mind that my primary goal was to move the narrative forward, and my secondary goal was to keep it real. So that was definitely the choice I made in the balance of things. So as I was saying that before, that you could have a 6-hour interrogation. Now you will have to, for the sake of the narrative, for the sake of the reader, and of course you don't have to do anything. You could be James Joyce and do Ulysses, right? And just put all 6 hours of the interrogation in there. But let's just talk about like the more or less the norm. In the normal thing, I would think that you will have to make some concessions to the reader and keep it pretty much tight. And so if you are like me, who I am, like I said, I'm giving primacy to the narrative over the reality, I am going to work to keep those 6 hours down to 2 to 3 pages at the most, and still try and give as much flavor of the fact that it's going on for a long time, which could be just interjections in the dialogue to say that, they looked at the watch and an hour and a half had passed, or somebody felt really thirsty and had to go out for a drink because it's been 2 hours of conversation. So something like that to give the reader the sense of how much time has elapsed. And of course, it's not hard to give the sense that a question is being asked many times. That can be done again. That's a completely a trick of writing sentences. It's just you can just put it 3 times in a row, and for a reader, that's very hard hitting. You're like, oh my god, like, where were you? Where were you? Where were you? Would be enough for you to understand that this is very insistent and very problematic, what is happening. So that's how I was juggling the real thing with narrative flow.
We've skipped forward. We will go back. We will go back to talk about, how your career started, what happened after college and all of that. But first, let's take a quick commercial break. Many of the things I have learned in my life, I had to learn on my own. I think you'll agree with me that our education system doesn't teach us so many things that we need to make the most of ourselves in this world. I learned my lessons when life happened to me, and I happened to be paying attention. For many years now, I've been thinking, what are the essential life lessons that everyone should learn to be able to live a complete life? I invited my friend Ajay Shah to join me on the intellectual challenge of figuring this out, and then we decided to put together a course where we would actually teach this stuff. So we created Life Lessons, which you can check out at lifelessons.co.in. In this 5-week course running across 5 Saturdays, we have put together 15 webinars that are intended to help launch you down journeys of discovery. We will speak about learning how to learn, learning how to think, mindsets, mental models, clear writing, how to communicate better, quantitative intuition, probabilistic thinking, the history of thought, the foundations of economics, and even practical matters like how to think about personal finance and how to think about personal health. People who do the course also get to be part of a larger community that will have in-person meetups once a year. Basically, while we've always been sharing what we have learned in a piecemeal way in our show and our writings, here and there, diffused, this is an effort to synthesize our knowledge for you. So please head on over to check out Life Lessons at lifelessons.co.in. Never stop learning. Welcome back to The Seen and the Unseen. I'm still with Rudraneil Sengupta, if I can pronounce it that way.
That is the way to pronounce it.
That is the way to pronounce it. Who has spent many, many hours and days and months in police stations recording people. So this is not a big deal for him. So let's...
It is a big deal. I was recording. I wasn't talking. Talking is a big deal for me.
Yeah, so I gotta tell our listeners that Rudraneil came in and he said, like, what the fuck, you do episodes which are so long, I can't do that shit. And I said, don't worry, bro, you're Bengali. You have to talk about yourself. It is in our genes, and it's working out so far. Let's go back to the start of your career. Like, was it after college was the first thing you did journalism? Was it like a natural way to proceed, given that you liked writing and you wanted to write, and given your natural curiosity as well? How did that come about? Like, how did you think of your life and your career and so on, that what you're going to do? How did all of that happen? Or was there serendipity and happenstance involved?
I mean, there's a certain amount of serendipity, happenstance in everything, but it started actually in school, because back when I was in school, the once great Kolkata newspaper, The Statesman, used to bring out something called The Statesman in School, which was this little supplement that used to come out once in a week, and it became more and more like ambitious, and it was also called Voices after some time. And so there you had all this, what quote unquote, correspondents from various schools who would both write as well as take editorial decisions, along with one person from Statesman who guided the kids. And I was part of Statesman in school, and it was a lot of fun. We had lots of fun. And so I and used to get to see anyway the newsroom at work, and they would give you tours of how everything happened, everything from the newsroom to the printing press. We got to see all of it. So I was already familiar with the world of journalism, and and quite fascinated and thrilled by it as well. In college, I continued to write for Statesman, and then I wrote a little bit for Times of India. So I was writing all these pieces in newspapers anyway, and then ESPN started in India as well. Came to India for the first time, and one of the first things they were doing was Indian football. And there was a tournament that was going on, I think Federation Cup. They had one leg of the tournament was happening in Malda, which is this border town between Bangladesh and Bengal, truckers town, and they did not have a correspondent to go to Malda. There was only a couple of matches, but the matches where East Bengal was playing in it, so which is a big football club. So they had to send somebody just to do sound bites with the captain after the end of the match. That's all. But for some reason, they were looking, and the people who were looking knew somebody who knew me, and they knew that I liked football and whatever. And so they said, "Do you want to do this?" I said, "Oh my God, absolutely." So I went to Malda, and again, I had an incredible time because ESPN were also the broadcasters, right? So I straight away, from being a person who went to Salt Lake Stadium to watch East Bengal and Mohun Bagan play from the stands, I found myself in the dressing room, okay, with East Bengal, and Baichung Bhutia was captain then, and like he was like a great god to me at that age. So I saw Subhash Bhomik was the coach then, and he was this foul-mouthed, like angry bull of a man, and I remembered like I got goosebumps sitting in the dressing room with Subhash Bhomik giving his pre-game speech, and all the players putting on their boots, and there's like muscle spray everywhere, and in the middle of that there's a havan happening also. There's one like fire burning in the corner of the dressing room. I'm like thinking that can't be good for anybody's health. There's smoke in a football dressing room, but that's India. And so I did that. I mean, I had nothing much to do except to hold a mic, but again, the experience was insane. And like I was telling you, the obvious thing I did with that is that I wrote like a mini book just around those 3 days that I was in Malda. Malda was a character in that book. This strange town which had some, by the way, at that time, very unrestored but amazing architecture from I think 1000 AD or so. Malda was once a capital of one of the Bengal sultanates, so it had all that. Like now, I think they have restored it, and that it was very, very overgrown, and it rains a lot there. It's right next to Bangladesh. It's a very fecund, overgrown place anyway, and it's a truck stop. So you have all this, like, it's a very strange, like, new experience for me to be in a place which is constantly trucks going past, and trucks parked somewhere, trucks parked here, trucks parked there. And then there was football. So I wrote all of that just for my own pleasure.
Not published anywhere.
No, not published anywhere. And it was a lot of fun because I could just write it in whatever way I felt like, so later on I used a lot of that in when I was when I got my first print job, and I had to write for the editor as an audition, and I'll come to that later, but I used some of that there. But so journalism was familiar, and then once I finished college, I was anyway thinking I was going to be one, but a lot of my seniors were already in journalism, and they were in Delhi, and they were in NDTV, and these were good friends of mine. And so I was talking to them on the phone one day, and they said, "Look, NDTV needs a lot of people, so just come to Delhi. You will immediately get a job. We know you. It's very, very exciting. Rajdeep Sardesai is like this fantastic boss. He's a fantastic journalist." Which he was, and so I came and I joined NDTV as a studio line producer, basically. So I did that for a year before Rajdeep went to open his new channel, and he took me with him. He said that because I was producing a lot of the Rajdeep bulletins, so he took me with him. But I told Rajdeep that I don't enjoy being in the studio. I would like to be a reporter on the ground. So he said, "What do you want to do?" And that time I had had a profound disinterest in politics, which I still have. I just don't understand or want to understand or have any inclination towards it. So I thought about it and I was like, okay, there's politics, there's entertainment, there's sports. There's only three things that were happening. So entertainment, again, I had no interest in. Politics I had no interest in. So I just that's where serendipity comes in. I said sports, and so he said, "Fine, you join the sports team," and I joined the sports team there, which was a great bunch of people. Really, really fun. A lot of experiences. Went to my first, cover my first World Cup.
Which year was this?
This was 2006 in Germany. So that's how basically journalism started for me. And what I was saying about this print job. But soon enough, I realized in TV, after the first initial couple of years of, which is always good because it's completely new. So it's a bit of a honeymoon period. You're learning things. One thing that really got to me was that in TV at that time, and this is before TV has become what it is now, which is this monstrosity of like terrible proportions. It's like pure evil now, I have to say. But even back then, there were a few things that were very problematic for me. One is that you had almost no off days. No set off days for sure. You would barely get one off a week and you never knew when you're going to get it. Your timings were always 12 to 13 hours in office, and this could be an all-nighter or all day long, and so you had no life. After some time, that really got to me, that I had no life. I had no control over the timings of my life either, and the amount of time being spent in office was very excessive for me. And what happens when you have an office environment where people have to spend 12, 13 hours in office is inevitably, I think, you get a lot of office politics, because that's where you're spending all your life. And so you have, lots of office politics going on, all these little wars going on inside office. And I just it didn't feel good to me. So I was desperate to get out of there and get to go and do print, where things where I knew were less hectic, would be a better atmosphere for journalism. And by that time, Arnab Goswami had already started his channel. So I could see that all channels were slowly going down that little road which has now brought us here, which is that everything has to be breaking news and everything has to be a lot of screaming and shouting and irrational stuff and nothing to do with journalism whatsoever. But here was the problem. The problem was that the print people used to think that TV people are overpaid and underqualified. They didn't know journalism, but they were getting a shitload of money for doing whatever shit they were doing, which was true at that time. Before these salaries kind of equalized, now it's more or less the same. But back then, TV salaries were higher, print salaries were lower, and TV was, of course, not doing great journalism. So it was very hard for me to break through. So finally, I got this interview with one editor of a magazine. She told me, okay, write me a piece. And then I was very nervous. I was like, this is like, it's been so long since I got a chance to do this. So I thought I'll just be very free and write like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, like do a full gonzo piece and then just see where that goes. I'm not going to restrain myself. So that's where this Malda and East Bengal and all these things came in. I wrote a first-person narrative of being close to the Indian football team and what that was like, and it's no holds barred. And I told, obviously, this person, I knew that this is not going to be published, because then, of course, Baichung would have dragged me to court. But so that's how I got my magazine job after that piece, and then since then I've been writing.
Which magazine was this?
This was Lounge. It was Mint's Sunday magazine. Yeah. Saturday, sorry.
Yeah. No, even back in the day, from what I remember, television wasn't something that I was in Cricinfo at that time, and I wrote columns for a bunch of these papers, and we didn't look at television too kindly even in those days. And one of the things I didn't like about television, which made me clear that I would never be part of it, is just the form of the stories. That you get a limited amount of time to do whatever you're doing. It's necessarily shallow. You can't do deep dives. There's no long form there, and as you pointed out, it went more and more in that direction as time went by. And what you've done through your journalistic life is you worked in different forms. Now, of course, there is a form of the television story which these news channels expect, but then there is also a report, there's also a feature, there's also a deep dive, and then later on down the line there are also these books. And different kinds of forms lead to different kinds of content, and then doing that forces you into a mode of thinking. You are almost forced to be a different person when you're doing an 800 word story to when you're writing a full length book. So take me through your experiences through the different forms that you worked with, and how you arrived at doing the kind of work that you wanted to do. And was there scope for you, and is there scope for you to do that in journalism?
Mm. So, my experience, especially in hindsight, has been quite linear, in the sense that when I started writing, I wrote very small pieces, and even though I really wanted to write very long pieces, I realize now that that my ambition was a little misplaced for at that time. That I didn't really have the tools to write longer pieces than what I wrote, and I had a fantastic editor who saw my potential, who knew what I could do and what I could not do, and guided me along the way to go from my 500 word pieces to my 800 word pieces to my 1200, and then finally to when I was writing 5,000, 6,000 words. And it took a few years, and it took a few years of learning, and learning not just to write but also to report in a way that leads to a 5,000 word piece. I think that was actually like a steeper learning curve than actually the writing part of it, was to get enough content. What that meant, how many questions do I need to ask? How much data do I need to have? Because one thing again, when you have a very good editor, and I was very lucky to have always in my life, actually I've had very good editors, is that they will teach you that don't, just because you're writing 2,500 words doesn't mean you fill it with whatever fluff you feel like. So there is a reason why every line is there. There is a reason why every description is there, and that you have to be very strict with that reasoning.
This is Priya Ramani, I'm guessing.
This is Priya Ramani, yes, and very ruthless as well. And that was very helpful as a learning process. And I think, and being this linear thing was a good thing. I learned how to scale it up, with content, not just with fluff. And finally, once I was there, it was a great experience, because I was allowed to do these long pieces, and I was allowed to pick and choose what I would write about. Priya also is the person who sent me towards wrestling. She's the one who said, go and do a story on Sushil Kumar. He's so sexy. And I'm like, yes, he is. And so I went and I did a story on him. And then that's how eventually the book proposal came along, because of these stories. And what was your question again?
My question was your experience of navigating all these different forms and how they change you as a writer, and they make demands on you. Because if you're writing a 5,000 word piece, you're spreading out in a way that forces you to work differently.
Yes.
And it literally changes who you are.
Yes. And no, I think it was for me very, very rewarding when I finally started to write longer pieces. I absolutely loved the experience of working with it. I had a lot of different moving pieces. I had to fit them in a narrative that made sense, and I would always have these I would make these distinctions between what was observation and why that observation was necessary in the piece, what was the actual reported requirements for the report itself. Okay, what is the real meat of the story, then the amount of data that I needed, conversations divided into two categories: conversations that were important for the meat of the story, and conversations that just had to be included because of the color in it. And finally feelings. And this was important because the feeling wasn't about how I felt about something, which I had to be very careful about not being judgmental about what I was reporting, because that doesn't make for good journalism. But what I mean by feeling is that I may have something could have had a strong impression on me, and I needed to, in a non-judgmental, non-biased way, bring out a little bit of that impression in the story itself. And these could be simple things, like, for example, the thing that left the biggest impression on me when I was writing about wrestling is the way the human body looks when it wrestles is a very flowy like, I mean, before I actually got into the world, I thought it was all about power and strength. And of course, you see wrestlers, they're big and they're bulky and they have so much muscle. You don't expect the kind of grace in the movement that is actually there in wrestling, and in good wrestling. And it's also very difficult to see on screens, because when you see it on screen, things are happening too fast. They are happening too fast. Either you get to see really good quality slow motion, or you have to see it in real life to see how much grace and agility and mobility there is in the bodies as they are moving. And I was absolutely spellbound when I first saw these, the bodies moving. I was like, wow, like, and somehow I had to bring this kind of impression of being spellbound by this into the story without taking up too much space, because the story is not about, the human body. And and so those were really fun things to learn about, and to kind of structure in my own head and structure in my writing, to see how I will, and also to go from the dry to the colorful, from the colorful to the dry. There is a pacing, very much like music. There is a pacing to it that's very important, which I always found a lot of fun to experiment with and to play with and see where it gets me.
What kind of stories were you drawn to? Because every time you choose a story, it is because of particular reasons and it really has to do with you. And every time you choose an aspect of a story, even a story that may have been assigned to you, you choose what is fascinating to you. So what was that journey like towards figuring out what interested you? Like when I did my little feature story on Sakshi, which came about accidentally, the human struggle part was the most fascinating. That struggle even before the bouts, where Sakshi spoke about how she and Vinesh Fogart for 2 days has starved themselves to make the weight, and which of course has a modern resonance given, what happened last year.
Yeah.
So, what were the things that drew you the most, and what were the themes that you found became a leitmotif in your pursuits, as it were?
One of the things that draws me is actually a very vague thing, which is that I always want to immerse myself in a world I don't know anything about, and I want to find out what that is like. And this goes back a little bit towards Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and gonzo journalism, and I don't know if you have read another piece by him about Kentucky Derby.
I've only read Fear and Loathing.
Okay, which is even funnier than Fear and Loathing. It's not a book. It's a long form piece that he wrote, and it's like, it's purely like vitriolic observation about what the Kentucky Derby is like. And I like being immersed in worlds about which I know nothing, and where I am allowed to spend time observing and having my own impressions about it. So that is one thing that always drove me. So, and because I was in sport, mostly in sports journalism. Before there was a point when I stopped being a sports journalist and I became purely a long form writer. But when I was a sports journalist, that actually afforded me a lot of topics, because I knew almost nothing about most sports apart from football and cricket. I knew nothing about the world of wrestling before I started reporting on wrestling. So I got that opportunity to just spend lots of time actually on the ground, watching things and learning things. Same with running marathons, or throwing the javelin, or throwing the discus, and all these things were things I had no idea about, and I didn't know the lives that people had to lead to be where they are. In some ways also, I have obviously a fascination for extraordinary lives. These are all extraordinary lives. For every athlete, the amount of work and the amount of sacrifice and time and pushing of the self that has to happen for any kind of success is quite extraordinary. And yeah, so that really drew me. And so when I stopped doing sports journalism, I started doing just long form pieces. Also, I tried to immerse myself in worlds I didn't know anything about. For example, I wrote a very long piece on firefighters in Delhi, and I thought about it. I'm like, we know nothing about our firefighters except for they look poorly equipped and unfit for their job, which I found out immediately was unfounded bias about because I knew nothing about them. Because the person I followed around was a completely mad daredevil. Like, he just went into burning buildings, like, where, I kid you not, the chances of his survival were always 50-50. And I saw him doing this like time and again over a period of a month. I'm like, boss, like every time you do this, you don't know if you're coming out. And he would lead. He was an officer, and he would always lead the way, and he would always go into the most difficult situation where other people would not. He would not let other people go in, but he would go in himself. So amazing. And again, an extraordinary life. It was, as an experience, completely mind-blowing for me to be around with a man who enters like buildings on fire for as a duty. you know so yeah, that's what drew me.
A beautiful frame I learned from an episode I recorded earlier this week with Gurcharan Das was of the difference between a solemn man and a serious man. And the definition there was: a solemn man takes himself seriously, and a serious man takes his work seriously. Right now, you're obviously a serious man, but no man starts out serious. I think every man, to begin with, there is a sense of solemnity, in the sense they want to be great writers, they want to use fancy phrases, they want to, it's all about them. And then you make the journey. And if you're going to get anywhere and be good, you have to make that journey where you learn to get the self out of it, and you're just driven by curiosity and empathy, both of those. And you kind of make that journey. And even in The Beast Within, Prashant Kumar is almost making that journey, where at one point you have this great sentence where something happens and he thinks, a self-centered man, an empty man, that's all I am, he thought. It was not a new thought for him. Stop quote. And I think this is a constant struggle within us, something that I also struggle with, that how much of the time am I driven by hubris or a self-image of myself, and how much of the time am I really interested and really caring. And I guess when you make these journeys into something new, when you go to the villages of Haryana, there's a danger that one side of you is, oh, I am this great writer who will make great material and write a great story or a great book. But there's another side of you that to be able to do those things, you have to exit. You have to take yourself out of the equation and just immerse yourself, and then let whatever happen. So what has that journey been like for you?
It's very interesting. I mean, I have never thought about it in these terms, actually, but I have not been a confident person for most of my life. So in some ways, while I might have fantasized about being a great writer and all of that stuff, I always had very low self-confidence about whether I can do it or not. And not do it. By do it, I don't mean become a great writer, but write anything at all. And I found that the way for me to counteract my low self-confidence was to trust the fact that I am a good observer. So, and that in a way actually takes out the I from the situation, because I didn't trust my I anyway. I just wanted to, as much as possible, not be present in what I was doing. So, and this is a kind of complicated situation in my head where I, like I said, I overcame my low self-confidence by trying to be as faithful as to my observation, and to as faithful to the conversation that I was listening to, and reproducing that. And part of the low self-confidence thing, which was very helpful, was also to be very obedient to my editor. I think that made a big difference in my life, is that I listened to the people who were, my bosses, and who I thought was giving me very good advice. This would not have been the case if I thought that they were in any way controlling of me. The one thing I completely loathe is being controlled. And and this takes me back to the thing I was saying about that my English teacher in the first class said that you are here by choice. If you like it, you're here, otherwise you don't have to be. So and again, I'm very grateful that my editors were not controlling, but really did give me good advice. And I never had a dilemma about, oh my god, this person knows nothing and is telling me how to do shit. I'll just do it my way. No, I listened to them and I learned from that, and And over time, my relationship with my self confidence has become very different, and I'm much more calm about it now. I don't really think so much about whether I have high self confidence or low self confidence. I just enjoy being wherever I am, doing whatever I am doing, and I've learned how to do that, and that's been a wonderful change in my life. But I didn't really struggle with, I think, removing myself from the picture. Sometimes what I did struggle with is removing judgments. In some ways it was easy. For example, when I was doing the sporting world again, or any world, like I said, that I wanted to experience worlds about which I knew nothing. Now, one thing about those worlds is if you don't know anything about it, it's very hard to judge it. It's very hard to feel biased towards things. Even if I'm going into Haryana and I'm seeing all the patriarchal society, the rural Haryana is so new for me and so different for me, and the wrestling world is so new and different for me, that even the obvious evil, like a highly patriarchal society, doesn't really register as such. Okay, I mean, intellectually, yes, sure. When I sit down and I think about it, I'm like, man, those guys are crazy. And then what happens is that, then I go back and I do, as I am doing my research into my book, I'm actually seeing this going through a radical transformation, where women are, when people were saying things like, women make the akhada impure, they cannot step into an akhada and all of that stuff, and they cannot watch men fighting because they should be in their house with their veils on and all of that. From there to this, in that space of 4 to 5 years, I saw Haryana change from that to sending every daughter to a wrestling or cricket academy or whatever academy. Like, they're like, we will let our daughter do what she wants. I'm like, what? Like 3 years back, I heard the exact opposite. Now I'm hearing. So, so that it was so fascinating that I didn't have time to register judgments and things like that. Nonetheless, when I was writing fiction, of course, because in fiction I'm using a lot of my own internal world and my own experiences, whether from childhood or from now or whatever, in disguised ways in the book. My judgment comes through sometimes, and again, I have an excellent editor who can point that out to me and tell me things like, next time just let go of the judgment and see the fun. And that really appealed to me. I'm like, yes, let me. Like, you see Parveen, who's a very sexist wife beater and all of that stuff, and I clearly have a huge problem with him, but my editor loves his character. And I remember having a conversation with her and saying, like, how can you like him? And she says, no, he's deeply dislikable as a man, but he's a fantastic character. I realized as I was talking to her that I have a lot of bad feelings about Parveen, but I don't have to have them. He is who he is, and I can just let him be. And in my next book, I'm going to try to see what happens when I just let him be, and don't always feel icky when I'm writing his parts.
No, even in Enter the Dangal, like, what is really interesting and what I learned from your book about wrestling in Haryana, because the fundamental question you go in with is, in such a misogynist society where I think you have something like 877 women for every 1,000 men.
Yeah.
How is it that so many women are out wrestling? And actually, as I learned from your book, it's a patriarchal impulse only, that Chandiram wants to live vicariously and achieve what he could not as a great wrestler himself, even though he won an Asian Games gold and all that. And then it's announced by the Olympic Committee that women's wrestling will now be a thing. And this is a great opportunity for him to achieve his dreams, not through sons, but through his daughters. And that's how he gets him in. And then Mahavir Singh Fogat is one of his students. Many years later, he comes across. So this whole thing, what at a superficial level would seem like empowerment, is also just coming from this basic sort of primal impulse. And I guess the more you get into sport and these new fields, the more you understand Indian society and the less you judge, because everyone is, after all, a creature of circumstances and responding to incentives, right?
Yes, responding to incentives, that's a very important thing. And one of the big reasons why you see this shift in Haryana culture is money. There is no doubt about it that Sakshi Malik wins an Olympic medal and is given 1 crore by the central government, 1 crore by the Haryana government, a job, a big card, and all these things. Everybody sees that. And They're like, why shouldn't we be a part of that? Why should we cling to our old ways and miss out on what can improve our lives in very significant ways? What if we are keeping our daughter, who may be the next world champion, stuck in the house? And for what good reason? And then suddenly the reasons don't seem so good, when you are faced with economic incentive of that kind. Absolutely. But again, these are very complicated things, and there's so many different things that dovetail together here. Like you said about Chandki Ram, that Chandki Ram was trying to do through his daughters what he couldn't do, but he also had a son who was already a wrestler. So why not just focus on the son? Why get so excited about the fact that there will be women's wrestling in the Olympics? Take the initiative to put his daughters into it. And okay, so the initiative is coming from a man. Fine, like in a patriarchal society where men control everything, there has to be some initiative from the man, or some give from the men to allow certain changes to happen. But he I think that he genuinely did not understand why there was a difference made between men and women. Maybe as long as there was no good enough incentive, he was okay to play along with this social norm. Once he had the incentive and he looked at himself, I think he was like, what, like my daughters are like that famous dialogue from Dangal, that my what's less in my daughters. So he had that, I think he had that thought. And otherwise, why would he put his daughters through what he put them through, which is when he started and there was no women's wrestling, he used to take his daughters to these all male dangals where there were no women even in attendance, and he would make them do these exhibition bouts on the sidelines. And very often people would react extremely badly. Very often they would get chased out of that dangal with people throwing stones and coming with sticks to hit them and all that. And he would in fact have a getaway car parked right next to the place where he had laid out the mat for his girls to wrestle on. And the moment he saw the crowd turn, he would escape with them. His house was burnt down. He never took a backward step. His daughters never took a backward step. I have spoken to his daughters, and they sometimes gave me the feeling that and his younger daughter in fact said also in so many words that when I got into this, I didn't know what I was getting in. I had lots of mixed feelings when all these bad things were happening to me, but at some point I realized that this was for a good cause, for something bigger than us. And so you are right. I mean, the daughters didn't have much of a choice here. They were forcibly almost put into this position. But from there comes Vinesh and Sakshi, and who are, like, look at them now. Look at the power they wield, the symbolic nature of who they are, what they represent for the people, the way they took on somebody as powerful as Brijbhushan and didn't back down. And, like, wow, amazing. Like, it's a power far beyond the wrestling world. This is like truly something else. And I think there was once, I think a lot of articles were done about how families in Haryana are rethinking whether to put their daughters into wrestling because of the sexual harassment that happened and everything. But I think that looking at how Vinesh and Sakshi and a lot of these women wrestlers, how they handled themselves through these extremely difficult times, I think families are only too happy to send their women to wrestling. They're like, okay, my girl is going to be strong. She'll learn how to stand up to the world. She'll learn how to stand up to whatever is thrown at her. And I think it's a very, very powerful sentiment and statement that was made. I remember there's a very young wrestler that's coming up who's very, very good, Antim. I met Antim's parents, and they are like proper rural Haryana people, barely educated, keep cattle and all of that. And they said that, before Antim started wrestling, before Sakshi Malik's medal and all of that, we were just blindly following what everybody said to us about the gender norms, and we never thought about it. But when we had a daughter, and when we saw Sakshi winning the thing, and we saw our daughter was really interested in wrestling, the husband and wife said that we spoke to each other and we realized that we don't care about whether she's a man or a woman, boy or a girl. They are all the same, and they should have the same opportunities and should be allowed to do what they do. And if we find still that society poses problems for us, we'll fight it. And I think that's a very genuine change. I think whatever the intention may be or the incentive may be that sparks it, there is a lot of genuine change that happens along the way.
And I agree with you that Sakshi and Vinesh actually transcended the sport by, doing what they did. I mean, that fight that they took on was a much more important battle means much more than the medals. I mean, what amazing role models. After your book happened, like how did the process of writing the book and then the book coming out change the way you looked at yourself? Like before that, what were you thinking, that I am this, I will be this? Did the book change any of that? Did it make you more ambitious as it should have? And obviously, I'm guessing it made you more confidence because hello, what a book! But how did that change you and the way what you wanted to do?
No, it made a very profound but simple change in me, which is that before I wrote the book, I had absolutely no confidence about whether I can actually write anything that is book length, or I thought that I had no idea whether I had the tools or not to construct something that will hold a reader's attention over so many pages, whether it's book length or even like before I wrote this, I think the most number of words I wrote for an article was around 3,000 or so, 4,000 maybe. But after I wrote the book, I realized that it completely shifted my perspective of what I could do as a writer. I now knew that I had the tools, I knew how to structure, I knew how to go step by step along a story. And I no longer felt the restriction of how many words can I write or not write. It stopped being an issue for me. So after that, I wrote a lot of articles, even for newspaper articles, which were like 6,000, 8,000 words, and which felt perfectly okay, but not daunting whatsoever at me. And of course, it set me up to do what I've always wanted to do, which is write fiction. Without that, Enter the Dangal, I wouldn't have had the confidence to think that I can pull off a novel. But that definitely changed.
And even before this novel, I mean, what set the ground for it was the reporting you did between 2016 and 2019 as an, embedded reporter with the Delhi police and the time you spent with them. Tell me about that. How did that come about? Was it something you actually wanted to do, or was it serendipity again? Did you view it then as, research for the book? Take me through that phase and what you learned and, how that was for you.
So this was when I had a shift to becoming from a sports journalist to a pure long form writer with no beat. So the idea was that I come up with the story idea, and then I go, and if my editor likes it, I can go and do it. So I wrote about various different things and people, and like I said, firefighters. As I wrote about ISRO, looking to send satellites into space for whatever, like improve their business, all kinds of stories. I wrote about this guy who claimed a no man's land as his own country and what that entails, which was a very strange and wonderful rabbit hole to go down. This whole history there's a whole history of people claiming no man's lands as their own country, and then they get very, very serious about it. It becomes all kinds of, like, there was one man who off the British Isle, there was a platform that was used during World War II as a staging place for, I think, submarines or things like refueling area. And then it was abandoned after World War II, and it was in open sea. It was not part of anybody's thing. So this guy took over this platform and declared it his own country, and started a radio channel, a pirate radio channel, which could not be censored because it fell under no country. And then I forget the reason why, like the British had to send in like commandos to take them out of that place. um anyway, so all kinds of stories. But as I was doing this, and again, always knew I wanted to write a crime novel. I always knew I was going to do this from when I was quite young. I just didn't know how to go about it or what would be. And I took it very seriously that a lot of people told me that you need to experience things before you write about them. And I was like, how do I get this experience? So in fact, I when I pitched my first police story, I already knew that this was going to be research for my novel. And so I pitched my first police story, but I still came up, I had to come up with a really good one, that will hold my editor's attention, that, oh, I didn't know this. So I pitched something worth for him to, for me to write. And so that was my first police story, was on how Delhi police was inducting more and more women into the force. There was a very intentional push to take in, I think, about 25% or 30% of the force had to be women. So there was this one year where they went on a mad recruitment drive, and I was looking at what that was like in terms of where are these women going to be posted, what was their training, was there a did they face the usual sexism problems in Delhi police when they were working there. What were the women who were already part of Delhi police at that time, very, very few of them, what were they doing, what roles did they play, what was their experience like, and so that was my first story. And it was, again, I was absolutely fascinated by the world I found, and the people I met. So that was my first point of contact. Then I started pitching more and more of these stories, which involved it was always a social story centered around either Delhi police or crime in Delhi or something like that. And one of the stories that I'm really, really proud of, which was a very long story, like 8,000 words plus, was on the nature of autopsies in India. How autopsies in India are done according to a very old and outdated British law. And that, to put it very simply, that law states that any death that is considered unnatural, you need to do a postmortem. And that means anything from accidents or accidental falls from a staircase or a car crash or all of this, drowning, it doesn't matter. A postmortem has to be done. And so you don't have to, there's no investigation required or anything. It's just as long as it's not some disease and the doctor is not died in the hospital and the doctor has certified that, oh, he's died from natural causes, you have to do a postmortem. Now, what that does is that it puts an enormous burden, which our medical system is like completely not equipped to handle. And like thousands and thousands of bodies need to be autopsied by one doctor in one outpost in some way. Like there's no possibility. So as a result, what happens routinely in India, and it's still like that because nothing has changed, is that these autopsies are not done, or mostly done by the Safai Karamcharis, which is also has a caste angle to it, because the Safai Karamcharis are obviously lower caste or whatever, and so they are apparently like, okay, it's okay for them to handle dead bodies, and there's all this like horrible caste bias stuff that comes in. And these guys, or the other way is that you do your preliminary cut, which is a cut that is made down the center of the body from the throat down to the pubic area. You don't actually do anything. After you have made the preliminary cut, you sew it back up. Now, who is to know what you have seen or not seen? You can just sign it and say, done. And because this has become the norm, and this has become the norm not because there's a problem with people, but there is a problem with the system that asks you to do the impossible. What happens is that the serious cases also get missed. So you look at any of our big serious murder cases and all of that, you will see that the court has eventually thrown out the autopsy report as rubbish. This has happened in the Arushi case. This has happened in the Badao case where the two girls were hanging from a tree. Like, think of any big case, this happens.
And this is also why in the book, Inspector Kumar is insisting that this particular autopsy person he respects,
Correct.
that he do it himself.
Absolutely. So So I got to really see this world and speak to, and are the doctors who are, for example, the head of forensic pathology at AIMS, or head of forensics at Safdarjung, or in the big hospital, they are very open. They spoke to me openly about the problem with this, and that this is exactly what happens, and this, this is an impossible situation where the legal process finally gets totally fucked because the autopsy doesn't have anything to report. So I was very proud of that story. So again, that story made its way into my book, and so I started then now pitching just stories like this that will give me access to the world of crime or the world of policing, and that's how I did my research for my book.
And how did you get to that phase where you basically just went inside these police stations and said, look, I'll be here all day and I'll record you and I want whatever? How did this phase start? Because that, it doesn't really fall into, doing a story. That falls into actual, I'm writing a book. How did that happen?
So that happened naturally from my reporting days when I met so many people, right? And so with some of them I had very nice relationships, and some of them I could see were excellent officers, and I wanted to know more about them and all of that. So I told them that this is what I want to do. Would you mind if I came out and hung out with you a lot more? And they kindly agreed. So it was quite easy, because they also saw that I did a good job reporting on whatever I was reporting on, so they had trust in me, and yeah, so because it was all their blessings that I could do this.
Give me a sense of what you found once you looked at the making of the sausage. Like, an impression that many people have, which is broadly correct, is that there is fundamentally no rule of law in India. The rich elites who have contacts and all that will get some kind of justice, but otherwise there really is no rule of law. Like, an illustration of this is something that a friend of mine told me about, how a very important rich person he knew had a child kidnapped, and then the cops took it really seriously, and within 24 hours they located the kid and all that. And as you have pointed out, that in outer Delhi child kidnappings, there was a spate, it was endemic, every family had lost a kid, and yet the cops were doing sweet fuck all about it, till this one woman took the initiative and actually solved the case in ways that you mirrored in your book, as you pointed out, and she recovered some 76 babies in 90 days or whatever.
That's
absolutely
right.
mind-blowing story.
Yeah.
And again, I would imagine that woman was an outlier. That broadly the sense is that, hey, there's really no rule of law, the police is callous and doesn't give a shit. At the same time, it is very clear that there are lots of smart, committed people within the police forces, and it's just the system that is the way it is. And I wonder to what extent the system plays a numbing, dulling part, and is so dysfunctional that even good individuals within that can't do much. And the third aspect is something that I've noticed across all professions, and I wonder to what extent you saw it in the cops, which is that in any profession, whether it's journalism or any banking, lawyers, 95% of people are coasting. They're not really committed. They're going through the motions. They're ticking all the boxes, but they're not fully involved. And it's a very tiny percentage of the people who are really all there and who are kind of going for it. And to what extent is that the case in the police, that the temptation would be that it's a brutal world, you do the minimum you have to do, you just get through the day, etc., etc. And the people who go beyond that will be outliers, and even the best people will respond to the incentives within the system. So what did you expect going in? And once you got deeper and deeper, in what ways did you find you were wrong, or what nuances were added to your vision? Tell me about that world inside.
Well, isn't that human nature, what you just described? I don't know if it's 90%, but I'm sure a majority of people in any profession is coasting and is responding to the incentives within that structure, and that's about it. And that's just the way it is with humans everywhere. But I do, especially since I spent so much time with the cops, I don't subscribe to the fact that we are a totally lawless country, especially not in the big cities. The police in Delhi, at least, do an enormous amount of work, which goes pretty much under the radar, and it's their job. Let's be clear about. I'm not praising them for doing their job, but they do their job a lot of the times, and that includes investigating car crashes and murders and robberies and thefts and whatever not, like all kinds of things that are happening, domestic violence, and they will respond, they will come, they will do things, and all and solve the cases. There are two things though that supersede everything. One is influence, and unfortunately that is who we are as a nation. We can't blame the police, or not even can we blame the system, because this is in our psyche. It's deeply ingrained in us that there is a certain kind of people who are influential, and thus they must have the say, and what they say will go. And yes, in this fear, the police do not have freedom. They do not have individual. They can't even follow the system. And I don't think that this is about industrialists or businessmen. It is actually about politicians. The people who totally rule everything are the politicians. Now, if they say you have to do it, if they say no, you cannot do it, you can't do it. And this is a big problem. Now, beyond that though, the police do a lot of work, and again the system is not set up for them to do a lot of work. It's a very poor system. It's a system that was put in place by the British at a during the whatever 19th century, 18th century, so many hundreds of years ago. Our reality is nothing like what it used to be back then. The training is pretty much like that. It's very old fashioned. And like, why does Delhi police not have a murder unit? It's amazing. Like the only explanation I can think of is that it's not important, but at the same time, like you said, there are so many sharp people. There are the people who are committed, and which is the small percentage of people in any profession who take this as a calling, who take this as there's some kind of moral compulsion for them to do the right thing or whatever. They do a lot of work. Even within the system, they will do a lot of work. They will do the right thing. They will keep pushing. And the one thing I realized while I was with them is that, when you are in trouble or something has happened to you as a reward, whether you dislike the police, don't trust the police, or you are going to call the police. And 9 out of 10 times the police are going to help you. So, and we don't see that side, and we very easily dismiss that side, because the other side, which is this brutal, corrupt, all that stuff, is so much more, such an eyesore that it's difficult to see the under the iceberg, the under the sea, the amount of thing that there still is. So I saw my officers did a lot of work, and I remember, and simple things like, for example, I was doing a story on what happens when you call the emergency number 100, which is now 1091, but used to be 100. Firstly, I find that really strange that they changed the number, because 100 is such a good number. So
I had to make a mental note of it just now. I didn't know until just now.
Yeah, can you imagine? Like, I mean, if you dial 100, it'll still put you through.
Oh.
But I don't see that. Like, who came up with this weird number 1091? Why is that a nice number? Why is 100 now? Why it was built to be easy to dial? Even if you can't see it, you can dial 100. Anyway, I don't know. So I was I was watching how the emergency response team works, and so this is what happens when it works correctly, and that is quite like about 80% of the time, I would say this works in this way, is that the call comes into the call center. The person who takes the call tries to understand the nature of the call, then puts it through to dispatch. The dispatch, the person who takes the call tells dispatch what is the level of emergency and all of that. And there's a system, there's supervisors who are sitting there also, who are listening to every call. If it's a woman calling about like being trapped in a house or somebody's attacking, there's always like a rush immediately. Like they will be told that this is like extreme priority, send whichever PCR van. And so then dispatch has a list of where each van is, and then they will locate the closest van and they will put it out on the radio that van number whatever in code, please respond to this is the address. And so then the PCR van goes. So I was in all these various levels. I was in the call center, I was in the dispatch center, then I was in the PCR van. And for example, the night I spent in the PCR van, they did so much work. They and all kinds of work. They went and stopped a domestic fight where the man had gotten very violent. They went in very calmly, stopped the whole thing, spoke to the neighbors, spoke to the family, said and said kind of the right things to ensure that this is not going to continue when they leave.
Such as?
Like basically they told the neighbor, like they found out who was a concerned neighbor, and they told the neighbor that I want you to keep a watch. I'm going to call you and find out in some time what is happening with them, and you will tell me. This is said separately to the neighbor. To the wife they gave personal numbers, and they said that this is my cell phone number. Your husband touches you again, you call me, I will come personally. And all this like slightly hero stuff that works very well in these contexts, by the way. So, and threatened the husband really nicely, like proper, like that guy was like actually scared. And yeah, so they did that. Then they got a call about a man lying in the middle of the road who was drunk. They went, removed that guy, picked him up in a stretcher, took him on the side, checked him, saw that he was okay, then just let him be in a safe space and went away. Then responded to another call where there was a chain snatching, chased a biker, caught the biker, retrieve the chain. So they were working the whole night and responding to each and everything that came to them. Here's the difference what happens when the influential person, who's the political party, intervenes, which is that firecrackers are banned in Delhi, right? But of course our ruling party will not have any of it because this is a Hindu festival. So now if you call 100 and tell them that somebody is bursting firecrackers, you're going to get the worst harassment of your life. They will keep calling you and saying, what is your name? What's your father's name? What is your address? We don't hear anything. And you're like, but you're not even here. How will you come here and see whether it's happening or not? Then nobody responds. Then another person calls and says, oh, you called about firecrackers? Is it still happening? Yeah. What's your father's name? What's your house number? I said, I just told that to somebody else. नहीं, आपको बताना पड़ेगा फिर से. And then this might happen to you 10 times without any PCR van coming. And I know for a fact that this is an order. They are told that don't respond. Okay.
And harass a guy.
I don't know if the harassment, I don't know where that comes from, but what is the protocol behind that? But yes, maybe there is something to it. Like I don't understand why they would do this otherwise. So this is a way of a system that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work, and what the reasons are for them not working is quite clear to everybody.
The social aspects that you pointed about and the way hierarchy works also comes through at various places in your book very vividly. For example, Mrs. Srivastava, when she's being questioned by Meera, I think, says that, hey, what is your caste? Who are you to question me? And similarly, Kumar is also asked, like, what is your name? Prashant. Prashant what? Prashant Kumar. Oh, Kumar, what is your caste? And he says it's none of that person's business. And tell me about the sociology of the police force, in the sense that right at the start of the book, you outline what is the structure of the police force, right? So you have commissioners, and then you have joint commissioners, and then DCPs, and then ACPs. And the ACP level is where the IPS person enters. You pass the IPS, you're entering at the ACP level, and then below that are your inspectors, sub-inspectors, constables, everything. And it almost seems that there is this thing here that the guys who are below that line are the people who've got a bottom-up understanding of the way society really works. They have the everyday interactions, they have the connections, all of that. And the people above the line are coming with a certain amount of academic training and bookish knowledge and English speaking skills, but then they have to kind of they're automatically at the top of the ladder, and then they have to sort of learn the stuff that the people below them know, whom they might not even take seriously. So how does that sociology play out?
Oh, it's very interesting. I didn't see too much of that because I was mostly with the people below the IPS level, and because but I got the sense that those who were officers, ACPs and above, at some point realize that they are out of their depths in this vast organization where so much is happening. And this is where coasting also comes in sometimes, is that they feel like, okay, like, our job is so managerial, it's so clerical in some ways, that they start to do it in that fashion, in the clerical managerial fashion. The difference is that there are some DCPs, for example, who will head a district or a unit, who take great pride in heading their district or their unit, and then they will work really hard and they will try and understand their teams, their inspectors, sub inspectors. They'll talk to everybody, the kind of neighborhood there, what are the big problems there, who are the big criminals, and things like that. So, and in this, like, that there has to be good interaction between the two levels, like so this can play out in in 2 or 3 different ways. One is, you have that distinct line between the Jawan and the officer, where the officer doesn't care a fuck, and the Jawans will realize that, okay, like, he's like, let's just do our thing and let him be, or let her be. The other is, they will the officer might be too cocky and think that he or she knows best and is trying to impose, in which case that officer is probably going to get taken for a good ride. The third is the officer who wants to learn, who wants to know, who works well with his or her people, and of course that is the ideal situation. But it happens. It happens quite often, that the right people meet each other and the right things get done.
Tell me also about, the question of ends and means, in the sense that one of the things that you bring out pretty well in your book is the frustration of the police with bureaucracy. Like, you have this paragraph, the soul-crushing process when it came to the requisitioning of official vehicles at short notice, for example. Kumar needed half a dozen but could count on only 2, his own and Head Constable Hari Singh's. For the rest, gritting his teeth, he wrote a request letter he had written hundreds of times, got his ACP signature, his DCP signature, wrote urgent in big bold letters in red, and found a PHQ bound person who could hand it to the office of the DCP Ops. Right, which sounds absolutely mind numbing, and they all know that this shit doesn't work, and they find their own ways around it. And what it would naturally lead to also is this sense that, the system is dysfunctional, so if there are problems to be solved, we got to figure out how to solve it ourselves. And a result of that, I'm guessing, is the police brutality that happens. Like, in a beautiful moment of Show Don't Tell, you have this line about this bike thief who's been brought to the station, and you write, quote, eyes strained on his feet, hands clasped together in front of his crotch as if he expected to be hit there, stop quote. And later you actually describe some of the brutality, and you also speak about how your protagonist, Inspector Kumar, used to enjoy the brutality once but is now kind of sick of it. He's got that moment where he sort of turned away from it. So how does this balance play out? This balance between, there is a way of doing things and there is a reason for it, and these are the rules we must follow, but also that, look, we got to get the job done, and we'll do it this way, if not that way, and etc., etc. And the worst manifestation of this is, of course, the police encounters, which were famous in the 80s, especially in Punjab. But how does this balance play out?
So there are 2 aspects of this. One is that, like, most police officers try as much as possible to keep to the law and to do things according to the book, because they know finally if something is going to go to court, they need to be as airtight as possible, so they will do that. But one of the things you're talking about here, it seems to me, is violence. Now, violence is very accepted as a part of policing in India, and it is accepted by the best of people, by people with really good intentions, by some people who are otherwise really soft. And I think that this movie called Court brings
Masterpiece.
out, absolute masterpiece, brings out that aspect of it. You see the judge, who's like a completely normal family woman, but so there is an inherent acceptance of violence which most people seem not to have a problem with. And partly that stems from our very highly stratified society. Now, will the police do the same kind of violence to a person who they think has money? No, it's just not going to happen. They will treat them differently from anybody who they think is poorer or less influential or whatever. um, and and that is again, unfortunately, a reflection of our society more than the police themselves, that we feel that some people are okay to be bashed around, and manhandled, and and Kumar, of course, would like to do it to everybody. And I suspect Parveen would also like to do it to everybody, but they restrain themselves. But yeah, but again, is it the police or is it our society that allows these feelings to come, that some people can be hit and some people cannot be hit, um and it's perfectly okay to interrogate in this way certain kinds of criminals, like your chain snatchers or your bike, especially basically petty people. If you get petty people, they are going to get bashed up. Anybody who is a little bit above that won't get bashed up, which doesn't seem right, but that's how it is. And I don't think it's a police thing. I think it's definitely a social thing. On the other hand, for example, the PCR story I said about, they removed the drunk person from the middle of the road and put him on the side of the road in a safe place and all that. They did it very gently, very nicely. But I remember being in New York, and the subway, there was a drunk person who was basically passed out, and these two cops came and they kept telling this guy, "Sir, you gotta get up and get out of here. Sir, you gotta get up." And this guy was like completely like, he had no idea what was happening. And it was clear to everybody that he had no idea what was happening, but not to the cops, because they pulled out their guns, or they pulled out a taser, and they said, "Sir, you are not listening to us. Please respond." I'm like, what is happening here? Like, how is he going to listen to you? Just relax. But the cops kept escalating. I think that this, for example, is a problem with the American system of policing, where cops feel that you can keep escalating. You can keep escalating. Indian cops do not do that. I am very grateful that whatever their reputation, whatever their thing for violence, in most situations, you will find that the police are trying to de escalate violence rather than to escalate violence. And I think that is a very good thing. So, yes, this all that, both sides.
Another fascinating aspect of your book is that while the police may behave with disdain or violence when they feel like towards random members of the public, it will not be when there are many, many random members of the public. Like, the dynamic of crowds is fascinating. You have like two places in your book where they come out. One is when they discover the body, and it's like the two constables on the scene are told that secure the scene, and they're like, no fucking way, because the crowd is, you can't control the crowd. And later there is, of course, when they catch the child kidnapper, and the fear, the panic is palpable, because they are worried about the crowd lynching that person and perhaps them in the process.
Yes.
And you have once said, I think in a panel discussion I caught on YouTube, that you have witnessed a lynching yourself. And so give me a sense of what you have learned about crowd dynamics, how that plays out, and how cops take that into account, and how they manage those situations.
I think crowd dynamics in India are quite terrifying. I think they are more scary than police, for example. And I think the police find themselves quite often in very bad situations when it comes to the crowds. Yeah, I mean, I and this does play emotionally a personal, there's a connection, because I did see a lynching when I was a kid, and I think that it was the most traumatic thing I've ever witnessed, and I firstly do not ever want to see anything like that, and secondly, I think it is the worst thing to happen. It's an awful act, and of course in India, very, very common. And so the cops very often have to work with this in mind, that they can get swamped by the crowds, they can get hit by the crowds and things like that. So it is quite a part of their job to keep themselves safe from marauding crowds who can just randomly suddenly turn on, and go crazy. And in fact, I mean, one cop I know very well. I mean, I remember that they had a big fight at the Saket court with the lawyers, and the cops had gone in to pacify the situation, and the lawyers had locked up the cops in the Saket lockup, and then they had set fire to things around. Like there was a car that was on fire and all of that. So this officer friend of mine, she went in on her own, rushed in to try and get her men out of that lockup while this fire was raging, and got completely mobbed by like some 30-40 men. In fact, there's footage of this from a CCTV camera of her getting her people out, and then they're running, and there's like 40 lawyers like coming at them with like sticks and stones and chasing them. And if that caught up, they would have probably like killed her. And imagine being in that situation, knowing that this mob is coming after you, and and you can't do much. You can't turn around and start firing and stuff like that, because that usually makes things worse. So yeah, I think the police have to contend with a lot of crowd misbehavior, violence, and things like that. And very often especially if they have caught somebody, I mean, in Delhi, if a guy is caught stealing phones, pickpocketing, immediately lynching starts. Okay, and it could be anywhere. It could be in a slum, which would mostly result in deaths, or it could be in the metro, where at least there's CRPF and all these people. Then they come and stop, and these guys get saved. But cops have to very often contend with this, that the person they've caught now suddenly has all these people are hitting and all that. And I know this from female cops who have told me this, that very often in the mob, when they're doing this and they are going to the mob, they also get groped and molested and all that. So these people have absolutely no,
That's also in your book,
like,
yeah.
so they just immediately go in and start like grabbing and shit like this, like crazy. Like they have the worst intentions that you can think of. So why not now that there's a woman on the scene? So that's how it works. So yeah, they all have to contend with that.
A journalist friend of mine was at the receiving end of a lynching. I mean, he survived, but he was beaten up by a crowd. So he told me the story. I won't name him because I haven't taken his permission beforehand. But the way he said it, the way he explained crowd dynamics to me is that, and later, of course, I read books and learned about this. I think Le Bon has a great book on this. Is that the mob will gather and there'll be people shouting at you, or there'll be people on the verge of violence, and then some random person will come from behind and he'll give you one whack. And after that, everybody has a threshold. Like some people have a threshold that they'll be the first to hit. There's no threshold. But another person will hit you if he sees 5 other people hit you, and somebody will join in if they see 100 other people hit you. But ultimately, everybody will join in, because there's something in human nature that is so perverse that God knows what we are taking out on people and all
Isn't
of
that
that.
the most perverse thing? Like I find that the most perverse thing. Like my first instinct is that if for me, if like I see somebody getting beaten up, I would try to stop that.
Yeah.
Not to join in. But you're absolutely right that this is actually what most people, like, not, I don't know most people, but when there's a crowd with the intention of doing this is what happens. Like some people are waiting for one person to make the first move. Some people want 5 people to make the first move, and then they will join in. But like, wow, like it's just it's
And
really perverse.
I'll sound very weird, but I wonder what your opinion on this. I'll sound very weird when I say this, but there was a time I was a boxing fan, in the sense I remember watching Lennox Lewis win one of his fights, and I was like, oh my God, what a genius. And I was fully into strategy and tactics. And today I just think that, fuck, man, contact sports, which are about that, they're just so brutal. Why do they exist? They play to our worst primeval instincts. We are normalizing violence. We are making it entertainment. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying ban sports or anything like that. Everyone should be free, consenting adults. But I personally just find, that it's horrifying. They play to our worst instincts. And
I don't think I agree to that, because okay, so there's like, for example, wrestling. There's a lot of people who are into wrestling will tell you that one of the philosophies of wrestling is that it is not meant to hurt you. That there is, like, for even if you cannot strike. Right, so that's a big thing now. And even if you have somebody in a hold where there is danger. Like, for example, what is called a big amplitude throw. You're going to sweep somebody off their feet and bring them down. There's something called the philosophy of safe return. So even in when you're doing that, you are supposed to take care that the opponent that you're throwing has safely returned to the ground. You cannot just when you learn wrestling technique, you learn all these things, that how to keep the neck safe, for example, when you're doing these kind of things. And so so in that way, wrestling is a beautiful sport. It's about violence, it's about fighting, but it involves actually no violence. And I think when it comes to boxing and MMA and all these things, see, violence is, you have to accept, is a part of all living things. Unless you're a tree, and sometimes even if you're a tree, like you think of the strangler fig taking over other trees, that's a very deadly violent thing to do. But just about all animals, violence is a natural part of our world. There's no point not saying that, oh, it should be non-violent. There has to be some acceptance. Now, in what form and how much violence is acceptable? I think that is more the question. And in the animal world, it's mostly very simple. Is that the only violence you see is to either self-defense or to eat? And I think that is a wonderfully acceptable thing. Of course, in human world, it gets so complicated, and we are, of course, the most violent and the most destructive creatures, by such a huge, astronomical distance, that it is not even funny. So my point being that in boxing, at least there is a structure to that violence. The referee will step in if they think the other person is not being able to fight back. I think that is acceptable to me, that okay, you do it like this. I mean, this is not like, what could be unacceptable for me is, there's this very famous book called The Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison. It's broadly about the experience of being a black person in the US at a certain point of time. And over there's this tremendously difficult scene in that book where these two black people are fighting a boxing match in a white person's house, and basically there is no rule. There is nothing to stop them. There's just, you are supposed to go till you're more or less, you've killed the other person. And of course, that is terrible. That's a terrible thing to do. And to think that human society at one point of time, this was for us sports, right? If you think of the Roman times, or if times before, when so I think we have come a long way with our rules and regulations about how to minimize the violence in even our violent sports.
No, these are both good points. I buy both of them about the internal ethics of the sport, and also the fact that the rules don't take it too far. But that argument about it is natural to us. It runs the danger of committing both what David Hume called the is-ought fallacy, that just because something is this way, it ought to be this way, and also what G.E. Moore called the naturalistic fallacy, that if it is natural, it is good. I think the whole battle of civilization is that we are hardwired in certain ways, and then we use our rationality to mitigate some of them and to amplify some of them.
Yes.
And but leaving that aside, we'll kind of run out of time soon. So I'll ask my last question about the police before we go on to your writing process. And, I watch a lot of these police procedurals from America and Britain and all of that. And the wonderful thing there, which I always thought कि India में बहुत time लगेगा, यहाँ नहीं आएगा, is not just the great institutions. For example, your investigation is separate from your prosecution, is separate from the judiciary. And over here, sometimes the institutions don't have all so many safeguards built in. But apart from that, it's just a technology. कि कोई गाड़ी लेके निकला है, and straight away you are combining all the street cams and following exactly where he went. So I was delighted to find a hint of this in your book, where S.I. Das is asked to trace a particular car, and you have this passage. The car had not passed through any of the toll plazas on the northwest border of the city. Das had managed to spot the car at two other locations. First, at the traffic CCTV at Defense Colony crossing at 1:23, then at the ITO crossing CCTV at 1:39 a.m. He was driving fast. 6 minutes later, his phone was switched off. So they're tracking the phone, they're tracking the light cams. I was like, wow, India. And because I know you did your research, I'm assuming that, of course, this happens. But Give me a sense of how the police deals with technology, because my initial impression was, hey, the police is dysfunctional and it's going to take a lag. There's going to be a lag before the cops catch up with the ingenuity of the criminals and the way they can use tech. But as I have seen, even from the Mumbai police, that they're actually really savvy. Someone steals a phone, they can just recover it snap. That, they are on top of a lot of things to a greater extent than we might realize. So tell me what you found about this.
Oh yes, I think technology has really closed the gap between what you see. I mean, I don't know if that is the actual reality in the UK or the US about how efficiently they work and all of that. But yes, I think that more and more and more, especially with, I think it's come as a boon for police as well, that they have to rely less and less on unreliable institutions and unreliable systems, and go with this kind of work. So especially for those who are committed to their work, this has come as a great boon. Now the question, of course, also comes about like individual freedom and things like that, but I think we have totally given up on that a long time back. No matter what we say philosophically, our phones are tracking everything in our lives. There's like the simplest smartphone, if you're using any like 3 or 4 apps, the apps know everything about you, and thus the police will also know everything about you, because they can get access to those apps if they make the right requests. And of course, your phone is constantly geolocating you, and so if needed, the police can also find your phone wherever it is. And so this has become the backbone of our investigative system right now, is CCTVs and tracking of phones. So an interesting thing about CCTV that I learned is that I used to think, and I remember reading, sorry, what was the name of that graphic novel? Shit, that masked man who brings justice. V for
V
Vendetta.
for Vendetta.
Yes. So V for Vendetta. In V for Vendetta, if you remember, I remember reading it, and I remember feeling very dystopic about the fact that London has so many CCTVs. Okay. So at one time, London used to be the CCTV capital of the world. Well, here's news for you that Delhi has many more CCTVs than London. So we have 1,826 CCTVs per square mile, and London has 1,138. Mumbai has 157. So Delhi has CCTVs absolutely everywhere. We have a total of 4,15,000 CCTVs and counting. More and more are being put every day. And now these are like, as the technology is growing, these are all 360-degree cameras that are being put up everywhere. So this is humongous coverage. And I remember going to the Hoskas Police Thana because I was looking for a dog that had run away after a tree had fallen in its area, and it got scared and ran away. And I wanted to see which direction the dog had run. So I went and I said, like, can I have a look at your CCTV? I found an officer who likes dogs, and that officer immediately took me to the CCTV room. So here's like good things about the police also that I would like to highlight. And we sat in the CCTV room, and just from my house in Hoskas, there's a road that goes into a 4-road crossing. It's a pretty tiny, all tiny roads, but a 4-road crossing. And then about 200 meters later, there is another 4-road crossing. Between these two crossings, there were about 44 or 45 CCTV cameras. It covered every angle of the road and the pavement that you can think of. So I was like, man, like everything is being seen, everything. And I could see, like, I could recognize, oh, this guy is coming, and that I know that guy, and I know this car. And so so Delhi is the CCTV capital of the world, and it makes sense that cops use. And I think Inspector Kumar once has a comment to make about that, and he says that you would like more and more CCTVs. And
cops obviously would.
Yeah, cops obviously would. And it's a good thing in both ways. In some ways that you can't really fake things so much anymore. You can't frame people because you have CCTV evidence to prove otherwise. And yeah.
I want to talk about your process of writing now. You have a lovely para in your book, which I'll read out. Quote, Kumar watched as a small man with white hair and a wiry white beard broke 2 eggs into a steel tumbler, added a pinch of salt, a pinch of pepper, a spoonful of finely chopped onions, and a half spoon of chopped coriander leaves and green chilies, and his own little touch, the tiniest bit of chopped ginger. In went a generous block of butter into the bent old pan. As the butter foamed, the man poured the beaten eggs in a stream, swirling the pan in small circles. This, Kumar thought, was a meditative life, the life of counting beads, the life of God holding you in a warm embrace, the freedom to not have to intervene in the lives of others, the freedom to not speak. Stop quote. And quite apart from that freedom mentioned in the last sentence, I feel like the process of writing is also something like this, where you kind of just do one thing after another and you just put your bum on the chair and just get the job done, sentence after sentence and para after para, chapter after chapter and all of that, and not agitate too much about, what's going to happen next, or how people will respond to something, but just get the job done, put the eggs in the pan, swirl it, just do what you know. So what is it like for you, like in terms of discipline? You've written 2 big books now, you've done a lot of long form journalism. So what is it like for you, the act of writing? Like, does discipline come easy to you? Is it the journalistic life which made you just sit down and be able to write, which many would-be writers would envy? How does that work? What are the processes you have got about for yourself, and how have you evolved in terms of your routines and methods?
Yeah, discipline does not come easily to me, and I would say I have not evolved whatsoever in my routines and methods because of this.
There speaks a Bengali.
It's a problem. But having said that, I do find it very enjoyable to write. So when getting started for me is always the problem, is getting started, because I often find myself waiting for that perfect situation and many things coming together for me to start my writing and all that, but that of course never happens in real life. So it's a kind of making an excuse to myself. So I'm like, no, today I had to do this, I'm too tired, I'm not going to. Tomorrow I'll start because tomorrow I have none of this stuff, and then tomorrow something else happens. So that's a problem. So when I can get over that problem, I've started writing, once that happens, I find it so enjoyable that I don't really need to discipline myself to do it. I find that I'm itching to do it, and I keep wanting to go back, and then what becomes a problem is to balance real life with the writing life, with the other chores and other responsibilities and duties that I tend to start forgetting about that. And but so that's I don't really have much of a routine to speak of, but I'd like to start pretty much at the start of the day, as soon as I've at least had breakfast and maybe worked out a little, and then I'll just start, and then I'll go for as long as I can. And sometimes when I'm really in the rhythm, when I've started and I'm in that space, then I find it very easy to work in small spurts also, where I know I have many things to do today, but I'll still, like, between doing 2 different chores, I'll still find the time to sit down, and it's almost like entertainment to me, like, because it's in my head, it's turning around that, I've come to this scene and this is what is happening with the 2 characters, they're doing this, and the conversation is actually happening in my head. So, and it's a lot of fun, like, I find it really entertaining, and so I want to put it down on the page, and so that's how it happens. It's good fun.
And I was super impressed that somewhere in an interview you mentioned that ACP Sophia's father runs a CBI, though it's not in the book. And I was impressed that, hey, you've plotted out her arc and all of that, even though it's not in this book. It's not immediately necessary, but the background is rich for you.
Yeah.
So now you've mentioned that you're writing a series and there's one more in this, and thank God for that. Like, one of my complaints about Jerry Pinto is that Murder in Mahim is a one-off. Like, what the fuck? I told him ki 10 saal ruko, we'll get some AI to just do more of those if he can't, which might well happen. But so what is that like for you? Like, how big is the universe of this world that you've created in your head that goes beyond this book itself? You know,
Oh.
and and would it have been as big and as expensive even if you were not planning future books, simply because it gives depth to this one book?
No, yeah, I when I was writing, I didn't writing this book. When I started writing this book, I had no idea whether I was going to write one book or a series of books or any of these things. I didn't think of it at all. I simply started writing this one. But before I wrote even one chapter, I had written out backstories for all my main characters. I had pages and pages of stories, personality traits, how they look, how they dress, how they think, what are some of their favorite things, and what do they like to eat, all kinds of things, quirks, and I had all of that planned. I also had the plot structure planned out. I knew what would happen in each chapter and how that will unfold. I knew the locations where these things will happen. I had gone to those locations myself. I more or less knew the time, but I really struggled with the time for whatever reason. Like, I don't know what the reason is, but I found it hard to keep the flow of time even in my narrative. So, but I had all these structures in place before I actually started writing the first chapter. What eventually ended up happening is that as I was writing, I had to change some of these things, and sometimes that was painful and a struggle, and I didn't want to, and I wanted to fit the narrative into what I had already put in the structure, and all that almost never worked. And that was one of the experiences of writing this, is to let go of the structure when in the narrative it's not working, and trust the instinct that because the narrative has its own instinct sometimes, that it takes you down certain paths because that is the path that it's supposed to go down. And so then what I would do for my next book is that I will always trust that rather than my structure. Though I will fall back on the structure whenever it is working. When it's not working, I will go with the narrative and change my structure accordingly. Yeah, so that's how it was done.
So I have 800 other questions, were 813 to be precise, but we are running out of time. So final question running out of time because you have to go somewhere. Next time, give me 10 hours. So my final question for me and my listeners, recommend books, films, music, any kind of art at all that you absolutely love, that fills you with so much joy you want to share it with the world.
Oh, any of the Miyazaki movies, almost all the Satyajit Ray movies, all of Kiyowala and Walu's Martin Beck series, all 10 of those books. I love Kwetse, especially Disgrace, which is
Masterpiece.
masterpiece of a novel. I love Moby Dick because of the language and the possibilities of what can be done with a language, and the number of different worlds it paints and the atmosphere with which he paints them. I think it's just insane. Like, it's difficult as a read, but when you get into it, it's like the reward is mind-blowing. Music is I think I'm open to all music, and all music is good. So but I wouldn't recommend any music because I've come to the understanding that I really love all kinds of music. So it's like, if I start, it's Beethoven and Bach and Mozart and blues and jazz and baul, everything comes into place. So I don't have any particular genre anymore.
You did mention your fondness for Justin Bieber.
Justin Bieber, correct. Okay, so fine. If I have to, then Julian Lage, who's a guitarist, American jazz guitarist who I'm completely in love with. I listen to him all the time. Bill Frisell is another American jazz guitarist who I listen to all the time. Since you brought up Justin Bieber, I had to make a quick U-turn.
Mouth cleanser, yeah. Had a cleanser palette.
Yeah. So those are some of the things.
Quick quiz question: which guitar does Julian Lage use?
He used the Telecaster fan.
Nicely done. Okay, you're a genuine fan. Alright. So, dude, thanks.
I also know what pedals he uses and what amp he uses.
Okay, that I don't know. So well done. Yeah, I shouldn't have tried that. But yeah, I'll link your Instagram from the show notes. Some great clips of you playing guitar as well. And please put more of those. And who knows, there's another life waiting for you out there. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me today. I had a great time.
Me too. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, check out the show notes, enter rabbit holes at will. You should instantly go over to your nearest bookstore, online or offline, and pick up both of Rudraneil's books, Enter the Dangal and The Beast Within. You can follow Rudraneil on Twitter at Rudraneil Sengu1. I'll link it from the show notes. You can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in and every podcast app of your choice. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.